Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? My name is Anna, and I will be your host for the next 5 hours. If you have any technical issues, please let me know about them in the chat. And also, I would love you to be really active and leave any comments you have. And of course, at the end of the block, we will have a Q&A session. So please prepare your questions, and we will definitely discuss them with our beloved speakers. Also, it's a special block because I'm really happy to welcome people who have just joined us. We really appreciate you being with us today, and I hope you have finished with your breakfast, prepared your favorite mug with coffee or tea, and the main point, you have open minds and you are ready to hear awesome talks from our experts. Before we start, I would ask you to take your chance to win a ticket for an upcoming Geekle event of choice. To participate in this challenge, you should do just a simple thing. So write your questions to our speakers in the comments. Use hashtag question for a ticket. And at the end of the summit, we will randomly choose 5 lucky winners to provide with a ticker. Be active and let the luck be on your side. Not to talk too much, I would like to present our first speaker in this block, Andrea Goulet, with the topic "Empathy is a Technical Skill." Named by LinkedIn as one of the top 10 professionals in software under 35, Andrea is a keynote speaker for conferences around the world, empowering audiences to deepen their technical skills for understanding and communicating with others. Trained as a copywriter, Andrea built her software company, and now this is like multi-million-dollar organization, so that is like really impressive. Now we will watch a video of Andrea's presentation, and Andrea will be live in a couple of hours in the Q&A session, so please prepare your questions.
Hi, I'm Andrea, and today I'm going to talk to you about empathy. And yes, you are still at a software conference. We are going to talk today about how empathy is a technical skill that can help you create higher quality code. So let's first think about where empathy is all around us while we code. Like, why don't we code in ones and zeros, right? Why do we use functions and methods and things that use more natural language? Well, it's because it's easier, right? Grace Hopper said, you know what? I don't think that that's very easy. I'm going to come up with a way that we can use natural language, right? And so she had empathy for the people who were going to come after her. And this happens so many times. We refactor so that code is easier to read. We put commit messages in so that we know what our thinking was. Right? You can even think of like logs, like which it's like, that's so dry. No, it's actually giving you information to help make your life easier. And so the more you start to look, the more you start to see there are a ton of different places that empathy already exists within our day-to-day work. But here's the thing is that empathy has kind of been placed in this soft skill category. And we had early biases within our industry that logic and reason and math and analysis, like all of that was the stuff that really mattered. It was the hard skills, and emotions and communication and empathy. Those were nice to have at best, but most often they were seen as liabilities. The truth is that you need both equally. One is not better than the other. In order to effectively create software, you have to use all of these skills. But let's take just a quick peek at our timeline to kind of see how we got here and where we're going. So this really kind of got started in the 1950s. So John von Neumann, who was an incredibly influential figure in the early 1950s, had a personal bias, right? He felt like logic and reason and math were really, really important, and that those would be able, like we would be able to use computers so that we didn't have to rely on emotions for decision making anymore. There were a lot of other contributions that he had. It's hard to really overstate how influential this person was. But he had some personality quirks, right? And biases and behaviors that were tolerated because of how massive his contributions were. But that created a selection bias. So only people who kind of really thought like him would work with him. And then you start to see in like the 1960s, like in the late 60s, the Cannon Perry survey, which was about 1,600 people, about 200 women, almost all white. That survey of 1,600 people stated that the best programmers don't like people. So immediately right there, we see people don't matter in software. Like we are taking a stand and saying that math is more important. Now, how did this survey of 1,600 people become so influential? Well, it became part of the backbone of a really widely used aptitude test, the IBM PAT test, Programmer Aptitude Test. And 70s through the mid 80s, this was used by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people and candidates were surveyed each year. And if you stated that you were personable and that you enjoyed being around people and you liked collaborating, didn't matter how well you were at spotting patterns or solving problems, you were decided that you were not a good programmer. In the late 80s, this starts to then take hold in the way that we teach computer science. We went from a more collaborative approach to really emphasizing individualism and like really competitive. My business partner, for him to collaborate with anyone on a project in the 90s, it was an honor code violation to collaborate at all. So this starts to get really baked into our culture. And then when people graduate, they start to go work, right? And timed math whiteboard tests, like how many, ping pong balls can you fit into a 747? And culture fit, right? It's not about values. It's not about, what is our shared mission? It's, do you look like us? Do you think like us? Do you have the same skin color as us? Are you the same gender as us? Like that was what was used for recruiting. Now, we did start to see a shift kind of around the turn of the century. And I think that around this time, you start to see XP, test-driven development, behavior-driven development, the Agile Manifesto. A lot of people got together and said, y'all, this is not working. There are a lot of problems and collaboration is a good thing. Let's focus on that. Also around that same time, a few years later, research started to show that empathy is not a character trait like most of us were taught. You're not born with empathy. I mean, in some ways you are, because it's kind of like language. We're almost all born with the capacity for it. We kind of naturally create some skills as we just navigate through life, but it's a skill. It is a complex skill that we'll see in a minute that we can hone and we can really develop through dedicated practice. Now, in the past 10 years since I've been in the software industry, I've seen a shift just, from 2009 until now, where professional skills like empathy and communication are now actually seen as important. They're not being written off. And there is a movement and kind of a desire to really close this empathy skills gap. So how do we do that, right? How do we use empathy as a way to kind of help us reckon and solve some of the problems that have developed over the past 70 years because we systematically kept empathy to the side? Well, this was my thing. Like, as soon as I started getting into software, I saw some of these problems and I knew about empathy and I had used it in a very skillful way because my background, I had spent the previous decade as a copywriter, strategic communications. I used empathy in a very skillful way to do my job. And so I immediately saw, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a huge problem. So when I first started trying to get people to understand this, I kind of just said, y'all, empathy is important, right? And hey, developers, you need to have more empathy. And the question I always got was how? And this was something I knew some of it, but it hadn't really dawned on me like how complex this topic was. And at the time I was like, I don't know, just have more empathy, right? It's kind of a feeling. But what I was doing was really just tossing around empathy confetti. I was just not providing a lot of value in helping people to really hone this skill. And so over the past 5 years specifically, this has become my mission, is to take empathy and make it tangible and tactical and concrete and incredibly context specific for developers who are doing this on a day-to-day basis. And to do that, we need to think of empathy less like confetti, where it's just have more empathy. Empathy is great. And think of it more like a scalpel, right? A scalpel is a tool and it requires technical skill to really use effectively. In most cases, it really helps people, right? But if it's used in a way that's not skillful, it can cause a lot of harm. And empathy is actually the same way. So Inigo Montoya, right? Jamil Zaki, who is the director of the Stanford Social Neuroscience Laboratory, he presented that empathy has the Inigo Montoya effect, where we toss around empathy, but we don't really know what it is. And this was me when I was tossing around empathy confetti. So I'm going to walk you through some of the nuances that I've learned about what empathy is and also what it isn't. So let's dive into some definitions and kind of look at some patterns and see what emerges. So Indy Young is a researcher. She has a background in programming, and her book, Practical Empathy, was the first one that I read where I was like, empathy is a technical skill. So it's the one that I recommend highly if you are looking to dive deeper in how to develop empathy as a programmer. And Indy's definition is empathy is a noun, right? Empathy is a thing. Empathy is an understanding you develop about another person. And then empathizing is the use of that understanding and action, right? And so when we see that, it's like, it's data driven, right? It's about research. Brene Brown is one of the more popular empathy researchers, right? She really kind of put empathy research on the map, has several best-selling books. And her definition from her book, Dare to Lead, is that empathy is connecting to the emotions that underpin an experience, right? Brene Brown also talks about how empathy is the antidote to shame. And when I read this first in, around 2011, 2012, that was what stuck out to me the most, because I saw shame and I saw toxicity all around me. And I hadn't prepared myself for that in the software industry. So to me, it's like, okay, well, we see all this shame, we see all this toxicity. Empathy is a great tool that we can use to kind of counteract that. Michael Ventura has his book, Applied Empathy, and talks again, like how empathy is about understanding. Empathy lets us see the world from other points of view, and it helps us form insights that can then lead to new and better ways of thinking, being, and doing. Helen Reese is a neuroscientist and focuses on the neuroscience of empathy. And her book, The Empathy Effect, talks about how empathy is really complex and it's based on a lot of different skills. So her definition is that empathy is best understood as a human capacity consisting of several different facets that work together to enable us to be moved by the plights and emotions of others. And then finally, Jamil Zaki, who talked about the Inigo Montoya effect, his book, War for Kindness, talks about how most people understand empathy as more or less a feeling in itself. And that was 100% me when I started on this journey about understanding empathy, right? I feel your pain, but it's more complicated than that. Empathy actually refers to several different ways that we respond to each other. So in all of these books, right, empathy, and in all of the research, empathy kind of falls into three main categories. And I think understanding empathy helps when we kind of understand what are the categories. So the first is cognitive empathy, and that is a rational empathy. That comes from our brains. That is analytical, right? This is not a feeling state. This is data driven. This is as objective as we try to get. And this is about identifying what other people feel. Next, we have emotional, which is what most of us think when we think of empathy. We think about this type of empathy, and that is the sharing of emotions, right? I'm able to identify with someone else's pain because I can connect to what I've felt in the past. And so we share that emotion in common. The next is empathetic concern, which we feel emotional empathy, and then we want to make something better. So it's wishing to improve those experiences. There are also some subcategories that are worth mentioning. So self-empathy, right? A lot of times we forget about ourselves, or we think it's selfish to turn empathy inward, but it's not. It's actually very critical. We also have mirrored empathy. I swear I haven't had a brain scan, but I think if you did, you would see more mirror neurons than me, because when I go to another country, or when I talk to somebody who speaks with an accent of some kind that's different than mine, I notice that all of a sudden I start adapting to their behavior, and that's because of mirror neurons. We're hardwired to adapt our behavior so that we fit into a group. There's also personal distress. So if we like feel a sharp pain, like if I ever watch a blooper reel and see a motorcycle like fall, I like jump. Like it's hard for me to watch horror movies and things like that, because it's like I feel that sharp and pain, and that's called personal distress. So looking at all of that, let's then kind of define a little bit more clearly what empathy is. So empathy is not character-based, right? It's not like I'm an empathetic person, but you're not, right? Jamil Zaki also talks about this if you've ever seen Star Trek Next Generation, which I am a huge fan, right? We think of, we are either Data or we are Deanna Troi. We are either telepathic or we are an android. And that has been built into our culture, right? I identify like with that, but that's not where we are, right? It's not like our adult height where it's fixed and you're on this scale. Instead, we can move, right? We can become more empathetic. We can become more rational. It's skills. Empathy is also not sympathy or pity. It's not telepathy like we just mentioned. Definitely not simple. There's no clear, concrete thing. Empathy is not passive either. It's not something that happens to you. You actually go out, and it's a very active process. And another thing to mention is that empathy is not acceptance. You don't have to accept someone's behavior to understand them. Empathy is about that understanding. It's about collecting that information and really trying to understand it. So in the middle, we have some like, yes, but, kind of clarifying things. So empathy is a feeling. Yeah, emotional empathy is about connecting to a feeling, but empathy is not only a feeling. Empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. That's what we typically hear. Kind of. However, we will never be able to gather all of the data that, creates somebody else's life experiences. We can barely kind of understand our own journeys. So being able to completely understand another person is not really possible, right? Empathy is something you're born with. Yes, everyone is pretty much born with it. So, there's a kind of disclaimer there. Empathy is intuition, right? That's kind of what we think of with the telepathy. But at the same time, intuition is born from experience. Intuition is born from lots and lots and lots of practice. So similar to, how we code, and we just kind of like, it's hard at first, but then we just kind of get in the flow and we just kind of do it. Empathy is very similar. You develop this intuition through practice. So empathy very clearly is a skill. It is a skill that you grow with practice. Empathy relies on good data, right? That you go and you analyze in both a rational and an analytical way and an emotional way. You have to have both. Empathy is complex and it is active. Empathy can also go wrong. Empathy is not all sunshine and puppies and rainbows. There are some instances where if we don't apply empathy skillfully, we can have some botched results. So let's just look at a couple of examples. So if we have cognitive empathy, where we're able to identify on an intellectual level and that rational level what someone else is going to think or act or feel or do, right? But we don't connect to that emotional level, we see manipulations, we see scams, right? This is where it's like, oh, I know that somebody is going to feel this way, so I will act this way to take advantage of them, right? That's not good, right? Like and on the other side, if we have empathetic concern where we see the plight of one individual, but then we don't assess in an objective way the impacts to a larger group, we can have potential ethics problems, right? Where we are so drawn into one story that we allow that one story to kind of drive everything, right? We have to remember to take a step back. This is about the balance between rational thinking and emotional thinking. And then also, this one I struggle with a lot is the emotional empathy, where I feel very deeply with everyone else, but I sometimes exclude myself from feeling like I'm part of that picture. And in that case, you kind of become a doormat. You can be taken advantage of sometimes, your needs are trampled. And so being able to stand up for yourself, Like, these are all instances of empathy, maybe low intention, but gone wrong. So let's think about how we use empathy as we code. This is kind of how I think of it, right? And based on my journey and kind of how I've learned to code and knowing what I know about empathy, this is kind of the first step, right? And it's important to think here, right? We've seen, you're probably familiar with pyramids before, where the skills on the bottom are the most important, and then you kind of stack them up. But I do want to mention here that these are not serialized processes. So you don't have to completely develop an empathy mindset first before you start sharing, right? You can absolutely run these in parallel. However, if you're going to focus, like, this is where you focus on what skills to develop, but you can still do the things on the other side. So we'll run through kind of what some of these mean. So the first is we want to develop an empathy mindset. And this is important because so many of us in the software industry have been sold the myth, and we grew up with the idea that, empathy is something you're born with, right? So deprogramming that thinking becomes really important, right? There's some books on how to do that, like liminal thinking is one that comes to mind, where you really have to make an effort to say, no, what I have done my whole career is not accurate, and I can develop this skill. I remember, like, when I was first learning how to code, I had severe imposter syndrome leading a software company without having as much experience as the developers that I was leading. I've constantly felt like a fraud, and I can connect in a way to the pain of feeling like you have to develop a skill that you don't think that you're very good at. But that process is internal. It's something that you have to do within yourself. And some of the ways that you do that is that you treat empathy as you would any other technical skill, right? You read books, you take lectures, you dive deep. That's what I found that most software developers do best, right? Dive really deep on a topic. And there's a lot to learn about in this area. Another thing, I've mentioned this a couple times, but to reject the false dichotomies that delegitimize empathy. And so some of these would be the term non-technical, right? This is a big one for me. And what we use when we say non-technical, it's actually code for, are you on the empathy and kind of communication side of things, or on the rational and logical side of things? And we can use this with good intent, but what we're doing is we're actually entrenching ourselves into these silos. You can be both. You need to be both, right? And so hard skills, soft skills, right? All the business, the engineering team, right? Any of those things where you see kind of a false dichotomy come up that is an effort to delegitimize empathy, question it and see if you can say something else instead. Another thing is to treat computers as tools instead of people. So as part of this kind of 70-year journey, a lot of developers that I've talked to over the years, they talk about how they were trained to make the compiler happy. I have heard so many stories, and my business partner shares this, where if you did think about other people on the other side and you mentioned, hey, we could make this better for this experience, you would get shut down right away. No, we're not getting paid to do that. All I want you to do is to do this ticket. Stop questioning things. And that's not a fun place to be, right? We need to recognize that everyone has good ideas, right? And the developers are not ticket takers, but from the developer perspective too, you are not coding for the compiler. You are coding for other humans. All of those different artifacts, elements of empathy that we saw in the beginning, someone is going to interact with that. Someone is going to read that. And so recognizing who is that person is an important step rather than just check the box. So let's look at the next step, which is clearing your lens, right? Everyone walks around with their own perspective, right? So it's like we're all wearing glasses, and I see, the world through my perception, which, is based on my lived experiences and, kind of my genetic makeup and, my circumstances, all of that stuff, right? And there are things that cloud our judgment. There are things that prevent us from listening completely and fully to the experiences of other people unless we take the time to kind of wipe off our own windshields. It's almost like we're driving around and all we're seeing is kind of this gunk on our windshield. And we have to actively take the time to clear all that off before we can fully integrate another person's experience and connect. And so that's understanding where are your biases, right? And we all have bias, right? Bias is not a bad thing. It helps us navigate the world and make quick snap judgments. And given the amount of decisions we have to make in a given day, that can be a good thing. However, it can have results that we didn't plan for if we don't recognize it and take it seriously. Same is true for assumptions, experiences, things like that. We also want to source information responsibly, right? We want to know, like, is this high quality research that I'm consuming? Or is it something that is, was kind of put together and there were flaws in the methodology and things like that? And, I've experienced that. Like, there are research papers that 5 years ago, I was like, wow, but now, it's being questioned. And so again, it's about continuous improvement. It's about constantly learning. It's about integrating new ideas into your thinking. And this is something that you will constantly be doing. Practice putting your feelings on a shelf, right? This is something that I worked with a therapist and they talked about doing. And when you're listening to someone else, having the ability to practice, like, okay, I'm going to listen to you, which means I am going to consciously choose to put my feelings over here and listen to you fully. And that is a practice and it is hard, right? And then another is to notice any dehumanizing or objectification behaviors, right? If you are tempted to treat another person as not human or as an object, right? That is, you will never be able to connect to that person in an emotional way, right? And there are many other problems with that. And this, again, you're not necessarily accepting someone's behavior if you absolutely don't agree or you've been hurt. But at the same time, recognizing someone's humanity, treating people as humans is a really critical part to moving forward and building with empathy. Pointing perspectives. So in this situation, we want to seek to understand individuals and not groups. And this is another place where empathy can go wrong, right? Demographics are super, super easy. They fit nicely into a spreadsheet. But if we think of people as groups, everyone in the same religion or income class or zip code or age or, race or ethnicity or gender, whatever, like, not everyone who fits that demographic thinks the same way. But if we think of people as group, we intentionally are entrenching ourselves in stereotypes. So recognizing when to use demographics and when to use, other types of data, more qualitative information, more, in-depth research becomes a skill, right? Again, assessing the quality of the data and starting to think of multiple audiences, right? If you're writing a commit message, for example, who is going to read that? Well, you've got yourself in 6 months, right? You've got the developer who you're currently working with. And then you also have the person who you haven't met yet, who may come on the team and onboard onto the project in 2 years, right? So being able to think through all of these different people and tweak what you communicate in order to fulfill that need becomes important. And again, proactively seeking that understanding. Next is communicating, right? So looking through all of those different kind of communication artifacts that we shared in the beginning, where can you apply empathy throughout your code, right? How can you name a variable in a way that is meaningful and reveals its intention? How can you seek semantic alignment? How can you find the meaning? And, one person says one thing, another person says another. And I think, to me, this is the hardest problem in software, getting to semantic alignment where we can understand each other's meanings, right? And that is a huge challenge. We also want to evaluate, like, our communication, the things that we are producing. Are we using the right channels that are effective? How is our content structured? What kind of style are we using? Are we using a conversational tone? What does the syntax indicate? How is it structured? All of that to become effective communicators. And then also, if you are just starting with your empathy journey, this is a great practice to just get in the habit of. And that is taking a pause before delivering an artifact, taking a breath and just reviewing other people's perspectives before you press send. And that could be for a pull request or submitting a commit message or sending an email or a Slack message, right? Just taking a beat, looking it through. And then finally sharing, right? And a lot of these are things with the Agile Manifesto, right? Regular reflection. It's important to create psychological safety so that we can be honest, right? It's important to speak up and share honestly, and that can be really hard and it takes immense courage. And then also recognizing that this is a system, right? We all exist within organizational structures. And so governance and organizational structures and systems become really important in order for us to be able to use empathy effectively. So one last thing to keep in mind is that perfection with empathy is not possible. Like I said before, there is no way that you will ever be able to collect enough data where you completely understand somebody else's point of view. The best you'll be able to get is a tip of an iceberg, right? So this idea of like needing to be perfect in order to be better, set that aside. And it's hard. I'm a recovering perfectionist. I totally understand that this is so tempting, right? But what we want to focus on instead is continuous improvement, making tomorrow better than today, and the day after that better, right? Always getting a little bit better. And then also marginal gains, right? Recognizing that if all of us do just a little bit better and constantly move forward on that journey, we can make tremendous progress very quickly. So the key takeaways for you is that empathy is a technical skill. It's really important in software. You also want to treat empathy as a scalpel, not confetti. Be skillful in its use. And by doing that, you want to understand what empathy is and what it isn't, where empathy can go wrong and where it can go really right. You want to make empathy a part of your daily development and then seek progress, not perfection. So I'm going to pause here for all of the people who like detail and want to know where all of this information comes from. These are fantastic resources to dive in. I'm pausing intentionally and kind of speaking a little bit so that you can take a screenshot and dive in if you would like. And with that, thank you very much for listening. I hope that this helps you build better code, develop better software. And if you wanted to reach me, the best way is through the contact form on my company's website, corgibytes.com/contact. You can also find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm a little less active there these days, but thank you very much. And I wish you all the best on your empathy journey.
Andrea, it was really amazing talk, and I already see that you are in comments with us, so thank you. And we'll see you in a couple of hours on the Q&A session, so we will be able to discuss all questions our audience have. And I would like to remind you that all recordings of today's talk will be available on our platform. I'll post a link in a moment. Yeah, so you can check there, register, and have a free trial. And the next speaker is about to start. So please welcome Adrian Kearns, who has taken a winding path through software development and to end up as a consulting solutions architect, where he works mainly in the integration and application space. And that's like not the whole thing about Adrian. So in July 2009, Adrian co-founded a Wellington Solutions Architect Forum. So that's just community for local architects to get together and share experiences and knowledge, especially those new to architecture. And Andrew, how are you?
Very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be up this lovely morning in Wellington. It's still dark outside, I'm afraid, though.
So, are you prepared for the talk today? So, are you have your breakfast and everything like that?
I hope so. I haven't had too much breakfast, just enough to get me through this. But no, looking forward to it. It's great to be here.
Cool. So Adrian will present the topic, your first project, where to start. So Adrian, I guess the floor is yours. Do you need to present, do you have a presentation?
I do, yes.
So you can share your screen and I will put it on the screen. So
Okay. Spot the beginner.
yeah.
Here we go.
Cool. So I'll leave you and have a great time, people. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Anna. Yes, you're going on to your first project as a solution architect. It's a little bit like going on to your first StreamYard as a presenter. So, good morning, everyone. Hi to you to wherever you're coming in from. I wanted to talk today about when you're going on that journey to become a solution architect and you finally get there and you end up on your first project. What do you do? Where do you start? So why should you be listening to me? So, well, just a quick background about me. So I've been playing with Lego since about 1976. Been a developer since 2000, working mainly in Microsoft technology, but don't hold that against me. Got into solution architecture about 2008, coming from a senior developer role, and I've been working as a consultant architect since about 2013. Based in New Zealand, I've had a bit of experience in Singapore and Australia. My LinkedIn's down there and my blog, and all the materials that I'll be posting, that I'll be going through today, I'll be posting on my blog, so they'll be available. So let's get into it. So why should you be paying? Why should you be interested in this? So obviously, new things can be scary, and I think it helps to have a strategy when you go into something new, to set you up for success. A plan that gives you a list of things to be mindful of, some specific goals to achieve, and a roadmap to follow. So what's in this talk for you? I'll be providing you a guiding path in the form of some high-level phases that you can work through, some specific tasks and actions and information to gather, considerations to be mindful of, and this will be packaged up in some resources that you can take away. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. I'm sure I'll get into the swing of things as we go. So I've been working on a book. I can't say it's going to be published anytime soon, but I got a lot of good background material for that. And one of the places that I started was with this here. Now, you're not expected to be able to read this diagram. Obviously, the font's a bit small, but a copy of this diagram is part of the materials that will be available to you. This is really just to give you a high-level overview of a flowchart that I came up with. So I was thinking about all the different engagements that I've worked on in my time, both as a consultant, also as a permanent architect, as perm staff in some government organizations, and tried to think what those all different look like. Small projects, the big projects, the medium-sized ones. And there's a common thread that you tend to go through. It's not always perfectly linear. The boundary between the different phases that I'm portraying here, it's not a hard boundary. It's very much organic. But this will just give you a sense of that flow. So there's 6 main phases really. The first one is the engagement start, or the pre-engagement really. So things to try and figure out before you step foot in your engagement. And the main one that we'll be focusing on today is the second stage. So that's when you're getting up and running. So basically from your first day when you set foot in the organization or on the project and you start working, what are some of the first things that you should be trying to do? And then that will lead on to the other phases. So the third one is your first outputs. I find that when I'm going onto a project, one of the things that really helps me get up and running is finally producing some first outputs, some tangible value to the project. That really is really helpful. Fourth phase is sort of your the main part of the engagement. So I guess when you're doing the heavy lifting of putting the architecture together. So that's one of the really longest running phases where you do the meat of the work. Finally, in the fifth step, you typically go through some approval processes, some architectural governance processes, getting your architecture approved and that sort of thing. And then the sixth stage is post approval, continuing your engagement. What happens after you've got the approval. For a lot of projects, you might find that you just need to get the project across the line in terms of the initial sign off from whatever governance board that you have to go through. And after that, you might find that your engagement sort of tends to taper off for a particular project, but for other projects, it can continue. So how we're going to break this down is I've got we'll go through the phases. So there'll be little purple boxes, and the supporting considerations, which are the blue ones. So obviously, I'm not gonna present in the small font because I'm not quite sure everyone's got the right magnifying glasses. Now, as we go through, so what we have today is we'll go through the engagement start and the broad considerations. So that the items there on the left. We'll move through then into getting up and running and the different contexts and the detail that supports that. And then finally, we'll have a look at understanding the path ahead. And you might be able to see up on the top left of your screen some a little grey representation there of what you're seeing on the main screen. So what I'll do is I'll have those highlighted as we go through this slide, so you should get a vague idea of approximately where we are in the path. Okay. And I'll just take a breath here for a minute. If anyone's wondering, why I'm sounding like Darth Vader, I had a complication when I was born. I wasn't breathing. I was a few weeks premature. I was put on a respirator, and they put a tube down my throat. It dug into the windpipe, and so whilst it saved my life, for which I'm very grateful, has left me with a permanent sort of scarring. But that's all good. It's better than the mental scars of being a failed architect, eh? So, getting on to the engagement start. So this is basically the things you do before day one. Before you get started. It's things like the commercials. So what's the environment that you're going into? Are you going in as a consultant? If this is your first gig as an architect, that's probably not the case. But if you're going in perhaps as a contractor, you might be going in as a permanent staff. So all of these things will have an impact on who you are in the organization and how things relate to you. It's also going to be a big influence on things like scope and reporting lines. Reporting lines particularly. So who are you reporting to? Who's paying for your time? Who do you need to keep happy? Engagement scope, you need to make sure that you understand what's being expected of you. Are you there to deliver a specific project? Or if you're perm staff, perhaps you've got a bit more of a wider remit. So just having an understanding of those things is really helpful. The engagement context, is it a new engagement? Are they perhaps in the business case phase? Are you picking up a project that's on fire already? These are all things that you want to try and get a handle on before you set foot in the organization, so you've got some idea of what you're up against. Relevant constraints. It's just we'll get into that more in the next phases. But if you can get a lead on that early, it's really good. So it's trying to understand the different constraints that are going to impact you when you're doing the architecture. Often these will be technical constraints, but there'll also be people or human constraints, organizational constraints, legal constraints, that kind of thing. So moving on to the broad and the project considerations. So this is stuff like the people, who you'll be working with, workplace culture, the level of formality that they have in the organization, existing architectural collateral, that kind of thing. So again, any of that you can get a heads up on before you start is good. Obviously, most of that you're not going to get access to until you actually start on the engagement. But that's kind of the stuff that you need to be looking for early. And if you were perhaps if you're going through the job interview process, perhaps you've got the job and you're starting to engage with the lead architect that you're going to be working with, or if you're in a consulting situation and you were talking to the account manager before you go into the project, these are the kinds of things that you'd want to be asking for and getting a bit of a heads up on if you could. So hopefully those will make sense. But I'll just keep going and get into some of the more meatier subjects where be a bit more of practical use to once you get started. So getting up and running. So this phase is all about you've set foot in the organization and you've met the project team, or you're about to, and then you're away. All eyes will be on you. There's a lot of expectation there as the architect. It is a leadership position. Certainly in the positions, in the roles that I've been exposed to, and the different architects that I've seen, it pretty much is a leadership position. The amount of leadership that you have will depend on the organization, and the context. So in some business scenarios, you will have a bit of influence over the business and the direction that they're going. particularly if you've got the trust of the business owner, the senior responsible business owner for the project. In other organizations, the business like to go and do their own thing, and you're relegated to much more of a technical role. But either way, within the confines of the project or the product team that you're working on, it is a leadership position. So your overarching objectives in this phase, it's really just to start embedding yourself in the organization and in the team, getting a feel for the people and the cultural aspects, that kind of thing. Obviously, you need to get acquainted with the project, what they're trying to achieve, and also the technical landscape, which is quite important. Obviously, as a solution architect, as a technical role, you're dealing with technology, so you need to understand the technical constraints. For me, solution architecture is very much about identifying the constraints and coming up with a solution that's going to fit within those and complement them where possible. It's not really it's not a role where you should be coming in and just sort of solutioning greenfields every time and completely ignoring all the different organizational constraints, the technical constraints, because that's just not going to work. So in terms of priority, when you're coming in and you're looking for these things, you're really looking for anything that's on fire. So if you're coming into a project which has been up and running for a while and it's not going well, that's the sort of stuff that you need to look out for. So you want to look out for any fires that are burning, low-hanging fruit, stuff that you can deal with quickly. The other thing about these points is there's no particular order to these. There's no particular priority to them. And that's because every project is different. Every organization is different. Whilst I can provide a sort of a playlist here of things to think about, it's very improper. It would be very improper of me to say that, these are the specific things you should go through and this is the order in which you should do them. It's very much just a guide. It's sort of a guide rails, if you like, things to think about, because you really do have to make the decision as you go as to what's most important for whatever reason. So just to go through a couple of these just in lightly. So in terms of the architectural approach and artifacts, is there anything which you dictated that you must use? So some organizations have particular templates that they'll expect you to follow. So if you can get hold of those and use those, that will give you a leg up. You'll have something you can work with. If they don't have anything, then obviously that's something that you need to start thinking about. They don't have a template for how they do options analysis. They don't have a template for how they do solution architecture definitions. The project isn't quite sure what they want from me in terms of a design. That's the kind of thing you want to get onto quite quickly. Organizational processes. Large organizations kind of tend to have a lot of process, so sometimes you need to sort of get up to speed on that quite early if you can. Understanding the high-level requirements, bit of an obvious one, but obviously that's one of the places that you need to start. So you really want to get hold of, you really want to understand the business's objectives, why they're doing the project, what they're trying to achieve. And you might find that in some cases you roll into a project, you might meet the BA team, they might hand over a lot of documents of business requirements. So you really want to go through those and look at the high level stuff, look for stuff that's architecturally significant. So if they're talking about buttons, what color the button is, obviously that's not really an architectural constraint. But if they're talking about doing search in a particular way, there might be things that occur to you, hey, that's quite a significant thing that's kind of a bearing on the architecture. So you want to be looking out for that early. And the other thing about verifying their requirements is sometimes the requirements that you get, they might not be well written, or they might not really speak to the business objectives. So just going back to the horse's mouth, as it were, going back to the business, just trying to verify exactly why it is we're here, what are the business objectives, what are we trying to achieve. That's pretty important. Understanding the impacts of project scope is another one. So one of the things that I often find as a solution architect, you'll get thrown onto a project, and often in my experience, the project is doing things that are new for the organization. So for example, one of the customers I've been working with recently, they're providing some digital services to their suppliers, and this is the first time that they've done that. And one of the areas they needed to figure out for that was how they did identity and access management for their suppliers. because they've got it sorted for internal staff and for some of their customers, but for their suppliers, that was a new area. And so one of the things that they needed was a customer identity and access management solution, something that they could use for their customers and their suppliers. But that wasn't in place. So there's been a whole journey and project just to get that stood up. So one of the things you have to be really conscious of when you're coming onto a project is, looking out for stuff where there might be major gaps. What's the impact of the project? What are the implications of that? What's that going to mean? Yeah. Thank you for that. So first day nerves. I guess it's kind of fitting for the subject. Identify significant system quality attributes and non-functional requirements. So it's really annoying. So SQAs, or system quality attributes. So that's stuff like performance, robustness, availability. So these are qualities that we would use to describe a solution. NFRs, or non-functional requirements, are specific testable requirements that are built around those attributes. And what I find is it's quite a good idea to get a high level idea of what those are early on if you can. For instance, you might think that security and usability, performance, availability, that these are all important things and should always be present all of the time. And that might be true, but you will find that there are projects where there might be one or two quality attributes which are particularly important. Maybe it's security, for the digital services to the suppliers, as I was mentioning just now. Availability is a really key one there. And that's actually going to, that's going to require the organization to lift their maturity in terms of their ability to deliver public services and the availability behind that. So there's a bit of a challenge there for that, because quite often there's a long lead time to meeting those sorts of things. So you want to try to identify that sort of stuff early as you can. And finally, the lead, identify a lead aspect. So sometimes I find with a project that it might be particularly data driven, or it might be particularly driven by the user interface and the flow that the user follows through the system, or it might be driven by integration. Now, this isn't always the case, but sometimes it is. So if you get the feeling, or you can identify that there's one aspect which seems particularly important to the project and the design of the solution, then it can be a good idea to latch onto that early, get behind that and help drive that forward, and then the other things will sort of come in behind that and support it. So that can be useful. It's not always the case though. So we've just gone through those white ones. The ones of the color now, I'll just go through those in a bit more detail. We've got some specific slides for those. So getting up and running, establishing working relationship with your managing architect and your project manager. So unless you're coming into a really large project with a large architecture team running on that, and I've done that once, and that's a situation you won't necessarily meet the project manager. But for most other projects, well, certainly in my experience in the New Zealand market, there's typically only one solution architect per project. And so in that situation, your relationship with the project manager is a really key one. Typically, the project manager will be in charge of budgets, personnel, that sort of thing, managing scope, and sort of operating the project. But as the solution architect, you will be the lead in terms of the technology. And you can also be in a really, really strong position to influence the delivery approach. Are you using Agile? Are you using Waterfall? How are you using these methodologies? It's not necessarily your place to dictate that, but you are in a position where you need to help shape that, particularly if you think it might be going a bit wrong. So establishing a really good working relationship with your project manager is absolutely essential, obviously. And the other key critical relationship there is your lead architect. So the person that you report to through the architectural line. So it might be the chief architect, could be an enterprise architect, someone else like that. Understanding governance expectations is quite important. Sort of touched on that before. Obviously, well, certainly in a government context, possibly in a lesser extent to a commercial context, but that's not necessarily the case. Governance can be quite important. So people will want to get an idea of what the solution is going to be and the project will typically need to get that approved before they can progress to certain parts of the in the SDLC. So it's really good to get an understanding of what those are. You might find that for some governance boards, they don't meet very regularly. They might have a fairly long lead time in terms of getting submissions to them. You might have to go through different levels of, not vetting, but you need to get things QA'd. Typically, you have to get stuff submitted so it can be read in advance. It kind of depends a little bit on whether the governance board is one of those ones which is more of a rubber stamping exercise, or whether the decision actually made and discussed there. So you want to get an understanding of that sort of fairly early on, and fairly obvious, but you need to meet people. So whilst solution architecture and solution architects deal with technology a lot, I mean, I guess that's what people tend to expect. It's very, very, very much a people role. So really, you are there to set the vision, help drive the project through, to dangle carrots and wield sticks. So to do all that, to be able to influence, you have to meet people. You have to establish a good working relationship with them. Not just people on your project team, but people and practices that you might be working with. The infrastructure team, the test team, their managers, people in the business, all sorts of stakeholders. Vendors, obviously, that you might be working with. So moving right along. So one of the other things that you can do, which is quite specific but can be really useful, is to set up an architectural risk register. So this is a simple mechanism that you can use for recording architectural risks as you see them. Now you can use this with your architectural team manager. You can use it just as a tool for yourself. So depending on how your project's set up and what you're there to do, you might find it actually more useful just to keep that as a private resource. One of the best uses of this that I've had was with an enterprise architect who was overseeing my project. He encouraged me to set up an architectural risk register. I set one of those up, and then every week we met and went through that and talked about the risks from an architectural perspective. So we kept this separate from the project risk register. The problem with the project risk register in some cases, it will get filled up with a ton of project related risks, and all your stuff will get thrown into there. Everyone will want to have a say. It can get a bit contentious. So I recommend keeping that off to the side, perhaps. There's no reason why you can't take your risks and add them to the project risk register as well. I often find that you'll have official risks which you need to lodge with the project, that the project might need to manage sort of at a high visible public level. But there might also be risks that are more risks from an architectural perspective. They might be risks that perhaps more affect the architectural team rather than the project. There might be risks that the project is causing rather than trying to solve. And so, the multiple stakeholders you have, you've got your project stakeholders, but you've also got your stakeholders in the architectural practice. So you need to try and keep them both happy. So having a separate architectural risk register can be really useful. But do keep the overhead for maintaining this as low as possible. You see there on the right hand side, I've got some suggested data points that you might want to capture. Putting these in a spreadsheet is what I tend to do. It's pretty easy. It's pretty hard to get wrong, easy to maintain, just a simple file. Some sort of a reference ID, the name of the risk, keep it really short. Maybe think about the impact and the probability, high, medium, low, that kind of thing. A RAG status. RAG is an acronym for red, amber, green, so the traffic lights. Some notes, maybe some notes on the mitigation status, whether it's open and closed, comments, that kind of thing. The thing to keep in mind with a risk register, if you do use one, and particularly if the project runs over a long period of time, which it probably will, is you'll want to have some notes in there so that when you do finally come back to it after 4 weeks of having an audit, you can see where things are at and it's easy to pick up again. So getting up and running in terms of the project context and the technical context. So the project context is, how the organization runs its projects. How do they manage, what are the different stages and life cycles that they have? what's the scope of the project, what are the methodology that they're needing to use, the project team roles and responsibilities, that kind of stuff. Where are we at for that? Technical landscape is similar. It's where the organization sits in terms of its technical constraints. So what sort of technology do they have? Are they running on the cloud, or are they on hardware? Do they have their own technical teams? That sort of stuff. How are we doing for time, Anna? I think I've got about 3 minutes left. Is that right?
Yeah, you're correct. So we have a couple of minutes.
Cool. So I'm a little bit over time, but the decks do have a lot of notes in them, so I'll let you go through those. So let me just see what else we've got here that's worth going into in some detail. Delivery approach and planning, and your technical approach and planning. So let's talk about how you're going to deliver. So does the team know how they're going to estimate, that sort of stuff? That's not necessarily your concern as an architect, but what will be a concern as an architect is the decisions that people make based on those estimates. So people are using dodgy information and making dodgy decisions. That can really make it hard for you in terms of the constraints that you're dealt with. How's source code managed? How will we test? How will we deploy? These are all things that you probably want to be thinking about and involved with. But it will depend on the project to what extent you need to worry about that. If you're doing a bespoke software development, obviously it'd be a bit more of a key thing to think about. If you're doing a SaaS project, using a vendor to do that, it might not be such a constraint. Another one that's really important, we're getting quite close to the end of my deck here, is things that require a long lead time. So one of the things I really urge you to think about when you're going into a new project is to looking for things where it's going to take a long lead time to get those things addressed. A key one is around people. So typically if you're on a project and there might be sometimes a senior role that's missing, or you might need specialist skills. So perhaps you need someone who's specialized in performance testing and developing code, getting it to a really performance standard, or someone who's specialized in security, writing code that's robust from a security point of view. These might be key skills that you need, which the organization doesn't have. Finding those is going to take time. Anything where you're breaking new ground. So the customer identity and access management solution that I mentioned earlier for another customer where they didn't have that, that's a whole major project in itself to put in. So anything like that that's missing, you need to identify that early because it's going to take a long time to get that in place. So look out for things early where you think it's going to take a long lead time to get those fixed. I've got application code review and penetration testing there. Certainly in the New Zealand market, security consulting firms are very busy. They're quite booked up, so you need to book those well in advance, that kind of thing. Lastly, the last thing I want to leave you with is, for getting up and running, is to think about the path ahead. So I mentioned before, in terms of the overall process, one of the things I like to do is to get some very first outputs out there. It might be some like a context diagram that shows the major applications or systems that we're using, the existing ones, emerging ones, the main actors of the system, maybe some of the functional goals. Can be a bit of a architecture diagram. So there's a few different things that you can do. So thinking about what those first outputs would be can be helpful, and then thinking about what you'll need to do in terms of actually architecting the entire solution. What's that shaping up to look like? What are the major things that you need to do? And then what's the governance approval that you're shooting for? Do you need to go just for one governance approval, or do you need to go for two for the entire solution, or do you need to get bits of it approved sort of in sequence? Get this main core bit approved, get that locked away, and then start working on some of the other bits. That might shape out. That will shape up your path. So as you come in on your first day and you're looking at all the different things that you're dealing with, if you can just keep an eye on where you're going in the next few weeks, the next couple of months, that will hopefully give you something to aim for, and that will help you figure out your priorities in terms of where you need to go and what you need to be thinking of now, and then what you need to think of next. And the very last slide was just some priorities. Like I mentioned before, it's very hard to put certain things in front of others in a particular order. It really depends on the context. But they'll hopefully give you a rough guide of things to maybe try and prioritize if you've got the luxury of being able to do that. That's kind of where I would typically do it, but it is open to interpretation. And that's me. Hopefully you're all still awake and we're able to keep up with my Kiwi accent. Thanks very much, Anna. Over to you.
Adrian, thank you for your talk. I think it was really interesting for our audience. I can see some questions which we will definitely discuss later in the Q&A session. And I would like to remind our audience that you can put a hashtag question for ticket and take a chance to win a free ticket for our upcoming summits. So Adrian, thank you one more time, and we'll see each other in a couple of hours.
Thanks for having me. See you then.
Thank you. Okay, so please now welcome our next speaker, Anna Kniphoff, with topic how to design your experiences and career to be a successful solutions architect. Anna is solutions architect at Facebook with more than 7 years of experience with software development, infrastructure administration and automation, technical support, infrastructure and engineering leadership management, pre-sales and technical account management. Wow. Anna, how are you doing?
Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here talking with you today regarding this career that is so amazing. And thank you so much for the opportunity. And I can see that you can add your comments and questions so we can address if we have time. Add this a lot. So, but if not, we have a new one to discuss the Q&A. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen.
Yep, I will help
Just
you.
confirm if you can see, please.
Yeah, it is available already for our audience, so I will leave you for now and have a great time together with our audience. See you.
Perfect. So thank you, Anna. My name is also Anna. I'm a solutions architect, currently working for Facebook, most specifically Workplace. And today I'm going to approach the journey to design the experiences and the career to be a successful solutions architect. Okay, the first thing that I should mention is that the solutions architect is a puzzle career. One piece would not form properly the image. You are really going to need all the pieces working together. And we also know that this is kind of a career that is compounded by a lot of pieces. But the most obvious piece is what we can call tech skills. So we're going to go through a little bit some of the most important tech skills that I consider so you can pursue to go to a career like this. Infrastructure skills are really important, and you need to comfortably navigate both an on-prem and cloud infrastructure, as not all the market has completed its journey to the cloud, and some of them never will by their own business reasons. This is really important to be used to navigate on both infrastructures that we currently have on the market, and also including the hybrid context that we have. An avoidable topic for the moment, considering all the regulations in place globally, knowledge on data ownership, security, and also compliance are must-have. It includes since the security layers provided by an architecture to all the compliance and regulatory knowledge. You all know how important data, security, and compliance are, and we totally need to be prepared to address all the doubts and questions our customers may have. Everything is connected by the network. To be able to design a proper architecture to the customers and also troubleshoot general network issues related to both network infrastructure, security, is extremely relevant. Checking availability, firewall and proxy rules, preventing connection, latency promoting instability, and protocols misconfigured are tech crucial skills to work as an SA. If you work as a solutions architect, you work with a solution. What is a service or a product to deliver value to some business? Understanding the product life cycle since the conception, design, until the post-launch is extremely important to position the value of the product, the reason for some change on product strategy that constantly happen, you all know in any kind of product and service, and how its features would address the main business goals. And here for me is the funnest part of the job, and when the puzzle gets really interesting. The extensibility capability we have through the integration of the product. Integrations are important, first of all, because everything is kind of integrated at an IT environment. You need to integrate with at least an identity system. But here is one of the huge opportunities to bring protagonists to the IT team. IT teams used to work as reactive teams, and we can totally change the game using integrations and bots. Delivering the bots, automation, are able to reduce operational costs and deliver a much better experience to all users. All of that is accomplished using our native integrations offered by the product or with the exposure of APIs. It does not mean you need to be an expert developer, but it is amazing if you understand algorithms logic, testing, troubleshooting, etc. And also understanding code best practices, design, and code architecture could be really nice advisory work you address to your customers. One of the most important integrations you're gonna have are regarding identity, as I mentioned before. It provides the ability to manage the authorization and authentication of users in the platform in a most secure fashion way. Experience with the main IDPs, authentication protocols, and so on are really important to properly advise your customers regarding the identity architecture. Okay, wrap all this up, and you now can have an architecture landscape. You can understand the customer environment, their model of IT governance that may possibly change according to the companies. We have like examples of centralized and decentralized governance models, and it makes all the difference regarding the approach you may have. And also their constraints. And from all this information, to be able to provide the best architecture flow in order to implement the product you master. And always remember, as long as it's safe, reliable, scalable, keep as simple as you can. Because we always need to remember that any point of an architecture is a potential point of failure. Less is more. And finally, we reach the less obvious piece of the puzzle, what we can call soft skills. The first one is negotiating. And it does not mean you are negotiating price or an acquisition process. Every objection you handle is negotiation. The time frame of execution, negotiation. Communicating is an endless negotiation exercise. So this is one of the most important skills you may have to act as a solutions architect. Handling objections are extremely relevant during mainly the pre-sales process. There are many reasons the IT team are addressing objections. They may not know the product. They may not understand the business value to other areas. They may not be engaged at the decision stage. It never happens, right? And handling objections is an art you should master. That is, from my point of view, the most challenging but also the most exciting parts of the job. And here we have the usual case of the unicorn. Customers want it all. We need to understand that as customers as well, for hundreds of other products, we also want it all. Here it's so important to position architecture, infrastructure, and the product state of art at the IT market, and how we deal with specialized products. Here is where the magic of integrations, APIs, automation, and bots would always win the game. Troubleshoot an issue is an investigative work. You need to isolate hypotheses, track the flow of data, discover the root cause, address the issue, and fix it. Consider this exercise in a more complex environment. And now it gets even funnier. Troubleshoot is a matter of practice, and architectural abilities are extremely important here. So always keep in mind that looking from outside, it's the best strategy to troubleshoot complex environments. And never take anything for granted. This is extremely important. And yeah, sorry, but shit happens. We are all exposed to downtime, SaaS, outage, you may know. All of us are exposed to. This is a soft skill, even if you do not think so, because during a fire, technical knowledge is not enough. You need to have sense of priority and urgency. You need to keep calm, and you need to be able to properly communicate to stakeholders and for sure fix or make sure the issue is fixed. And then we talk about frustrations. Frustrations are part of the human nature. They are unavoidable. And as I said, shit happens. What is important to keep in mind is how empathic you are dealing with other frustrations. Put yourself in your other shoes. Understand the impact for the customer and how you can mitigate it and prove real partnership commitment. This is one of the most important moments that you can actually prove commitment with your customer. It is nothing new at this point that it's required a lot of empathy, right? And empathy is something we improve as a habit, even in our personal life. So always keep in mind that if you have empathy, you have part of the job done, because you can see more clearly the context that not necessarily you are in. And while you improve your soft skills, one of them is to keep tech savvy. Technology is constantly evolving, and the best advice I can have for you is keep open to new ideas, new ways to do the same things, and keep an eye open to the news in technology. With all that in mind, it's clear enough that solutions architect career is a generalist career. You really need to be able to navigate over different tech areas, knowledges, experiences, practices, switch contexts a lot and every day, and to be adaptable. And as far as I understand the market, this is one of the biggest challenges on the SA hiring process, to actually map generalist profile. The history of technology provided us a lot of specialists in different areas. And today we have a lack of generalist professionals at the market. And it makes this difficult for who is hired, but can promote also an opportunity for all of you. And finally, plan, design, implement, but finally expand. Expansion is the key for a long-lasting relationship. Be an ally to the customer. help them understand all the potential of the platform or product or service you are delivering. It is, at the end, a win-win movement. Okay, it seems pretty straightforward, no? Not exactly. It is a tough way. But at some point, you would definitely hear, oh, how lucky you are. Okay, so as I heard this kind of sentence so many times in my life, I would like to share with you some sort of wisdom to be lucky. Okay, first of all, be humble. We just know too much of very few things. For me, this is one of the main advice I can give you. If we keep humble during the whole way and understand that we have an extremely complex collection of knowledges, we are always improving our skills, our abilities, and our knowledge. To keep open and humble, it's extremely important. Listen more. Always be open to listen again to something that you're supposed to master. There is always something new to be learned. I constantly deal with people that, oh, I don't need to know that. I already mastered everything related to this topic. So sometimes it doesn't hurt to listen a little bit more or from a new perspective. There's always room to learn more, even regarding a new point of view related to the exactly same topic. Teach, share what we have learned so far. When you teach, you learn twice. Most of you may not know, but I'm also a teacher. Before I joined the IT journey, I used to be a teacher. And this is something that is extremely personal to me. And I totally understand as a win-win movement as well. Because when you teach, you need to make sure you totally understand what you were talking about. As if you think so, it's something that we used to do when we are working with the customers, addressing speeches, handling objections. So teach more. Teach your coworkers, your account managers, and your customer success managers as well. Try to show them more what you do. Don't be afraid to face the challenges. Accept them. Then just make them truly possible. During my career, a lot of people told me that I couldn't make it. And I faced a lot of challenges. Changing from different careers, it's extremely challenging because you start all over again every time. But it's extremely valuable. It keeps your eyes and it keeps your mind open. Okay? So don't mind so much others' opinion regarding how challenging it is or if you were gonna make it or not. Just go there, keep your goals in mind, and accomplish all the things that are possible. Don't get used to be unhappy. There are plenty of opportunities out there. This is extremely important. It doesn't mean that you start your career as a developer, that you need to end your career as a developer. It doesn't mean that you started your career as a sysadmin, that you can't change it. There are a lot of things to do in the IT market. And to taste a little bit of them, it's also amazing to have all this macro knowledge of architecture. And it's always a great idea if you would like to become a solutions architect or to pursue a generalist career. You are not supposed to be alone. Ask for help. Don't try to be the hero. engage with the community and share your experiences. We're not perfect, but as long as we share all our knowledge, all our way, our challenges, and also our mistakes, it helps us to not feel alone and help a lot of other people to not feel alone during the way. Try something new time to time. Keep your mind open to new ideas. Test your curiosity and your innovation sense. Try every time you see a problem, an issue, something that you need to handle, try to use different approaches. I know that it's more comfortable to keep doing what we know better, what we are used to, but it's extremely important to our minds to test new ideas, to test new forms to solve the same problems. Speak up your ideas. Do not care too much about people's judgment. We will be judged anyway, every time. Take good care of your money. Is it relevant to this presentation? Yes, it is. Do not get stuck in the rat race. With a healthy financial life, you can take risks. This is what made me take a lot of risks in my career, to take good care of my money. So if you are prepared to give some different steps, you're gonna be okay. Don't stop studying. The struggle just got real. Be actively proactive. Do not criticize something with no action in response. Do things better. Take ownership. This is the most challenging thing to work in groups, in teams. It's that trend some people have to criticize. So do not be this person. This is extremely important. It doesn't matter your career. We are always working in teams. I'm not able to do my work without a CSM, without an account manager. I'm just a part of the huge puzzle. Okay? So we need to work better in groups, in teams. Don't be a hater. Put yourself in someone's shoes. How does it feel? When we deal with customers, we are gonna deal with difficult people. Sometimes they are frustrated, they have really hard objections, and they can be also aggressive. Even when we are dealing, and mainly when we are dealing with fires, for example. So people get stressed. So try to put yourself at the customer's shoes and try to put yourself at your coworker's shoes as well. This is an extremely useful exercise to be more prepared to this career, to deal better with the frustrations and objections of the customers, and to develop even more your empathy. And finally, the career is yours. Don't wait too much. Just make it happen. Don't wait for some huge advice, just some big change in your life. If you would like to try something new, just try it. Okay? Have healthy financial life, be prepared, study, but take your career at your hands. Question yourself time to time. Am I happy? Is this good for me? Could I be better? Should I stay? Should I go? This is so important when we are moving from different areas inside IT. Don't let anyone tell you what you can or you can't do. Never. There's nothing we can do. It doesn't matter which career did you start. It doesn't matter how many years you have of experience in some area. It's always time to try something new. It's always time to learn a different thing. Okay, and this is like a mindset you may keep when working with a generalist career. And the final message is the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I really hope, with all things said, that you can see maybe and change the impossible to possible and try new things, take risks, and be happy at your career and your personal life as well. Here's the message of who I am. I think I have already provided you with all my experiences, but I would like to share with you all the steps I took during this way. I started as a software developer, and then I moved to application and platform sysadministration. OS sysadmin, mainly focused on infra, agility, automating all the process and everything. Then I moved to a tech lead of a support global group. And I started my career as a sales engineer, like a part of a solutions architect work. Then I moved to be a tech manager at a bank. And now I work as a solutions architect. So this is just to highlight how important it is to have a diverse experience on IT. And here is my contact. And I truly appreciate to be here with you guys. And I'm pretty sure we have some time for questions.
Anna, thank you for your presentation. Personally, I was like so impressed, especially by your last question. So it's like in my heart. And like people who are watching us, folks, please let us know what do you think. Leave thumbs up and any other comments. So we would be like happy to see your reactions, because there are a couple of comments we already have. So actually we have like 1 minute left, so I think we will leave all questions we have for the Q&A session, which will be really soon. So Anna, thank you one more time. It was amazing, and see you really soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So our next great speaker is already in the waiting room. So I would love to introduce you Sonya Natanzon, who is a software architect in the healthcare. So she uses her extensive experience in the software engineering and leadership to build solutions that help patients. Today, Sonya will have a talk on the topic, so you think you might be an architect. So Sonya, how are you today?
Doing well. How about you?
Oh, I'm great. It's like so amazing to be together with you today, to hear amazing talks, to see reactions of our guests. So yeah, really amazing.
I've been watching it. It's been pretty fun.
Yeah, and Sonia, actually, I'm interested, like while reading your bio. So healthcare, is it like your decision, or it was made by chance? So
actually,
why?
Complete accident. Good question. I worked in a number of different verticals, semiconductors, telephony, banking. What I realized is every other job that I had just happened to be in healthcare. And I quickly realized after that there's a lot more value that you can provide when you have that intersection of technology and vertical. And healthcare is one of the most rewarding verticals you can be. You get to help people.
Wow, really nice. So before I let you go with your presentation, I would like to remind our audience that all recordings of today's summit we will have soon on our new Geekle educational platform. So I'll leave a link, and actually I'll leave you for the next half an hour, and yeah, have a great time and great presentation.
Thank you. All right. So, hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Anna. Good time of day to everyone, and welcome to So You Think You Might Be an Architect. I spoke at another conference probably a year and a half ago now, back when those things were still in person, and I introduced myself as a software engineer who is now a software architect. After my talk, one of the attendees approached me and said, well, I'm an engineer. How do I become a software architect? And what does it mean to be one? What do architects do? My reaction to that question has very frequently been a joke. And the joke goes like this. Do you know what is the difference between a senior engineer and an architect? Architects can draw pretty diagrams. It's a little facetious and a little tongue-in-cheek, but some days working do feel like it. After the joke, I told him that the definition of an architect, software architect, is a little nebulous, and the path to becoming one is windy and not well defined. You probably heard this from some of the speakers as well. Lots of different pivots to the career. And in the remaining minutes of the break, I listed out some things that software architects do, and I told him, if you're finding yourself doing these things, you might already be an architect, even though no one's given you the title. That got me thinking, how do I explain what a software architect is and what she does? Last time I really thought about it was when my son was about 6. I was bringing him home from school, and he asked me to carry his backpack. He said he was tired. I told him, well, I'm tired too. I worked all day. And he responded, but all you do is press computer buttons. And while it's very, very true in the view of 6-year-old, there's, of course, so much more to the job. And that got me thinking, how do I explain what a software architect does to a 6-year-old, or really to anyone? Perhaps software architect needs a great tagline. My friend who's a head of product once described work of a product team as building stuff we can sell and selling stuff we can build, which I thought was spot on. Or perhaps software architects need an elevator spiel, a quick 2-minute speech for a stranger explaining what it is that we do. But really, what they also need is that in-depth explanation of what they do and how to become one for those who want to become one. I'm wondering what you think when you picture a software architect. When I think of software architects, or at least I used to think of them like this, I think of consultants, these people who get brought into a company on a temporary basis, typically to start us off on a new project, implement new technology or platform, or sometimes to save a project that's circling the drain. They come in with that title and they don't stay for too long. But aren't there architects in companies that just work in the companies or government or academia? They don't work for consultancies and don't travel the world? Well, now is a good time to introduce myself. I am a software engineer who is now an architect of many years. These days, I lead a team of software engineers. I continue to architect solutions, especially when projects happen to be heavily cross-functional. I've specialized in healthcare for some time now. As I mentioned earlier, working in this industry has been very rewarding, and I do appreciate the opportunity to make a positive impact in patients' lives. My company that I'm very proud to work for is Garden Health. We are a leading precision oncology company dedicated to helping conquer cancer through our blood tests. Our blood tests, also known as liquid biopsies, detect cell-free nucleic acids that are shed by cancer tumors into blood at very low concentrations, and they enable timely therapy selections for patients with cancer. We're also working on programs for recurrence detection and early detection, which spans the entire continuum of cancer care. Shameless plug here, we're hiring. If you want to join a great company that's making a difference, please reach out. So how or when did I realize that I was a software architect? I think I first realized it probably at about third presentation of solution options to stakeholders after first 2 failed to get buy-in. And I had to make really big adjustments to proposals. Or maybe it was when I did get that buy-in, but only for a phased approach, and this beautiful architecture that I envisioned was gutted severely due to timeline constraints. I realized then that there's a lot of compromises in this line of work. And if you know a definition of a good compromise, it's when no one walks away too happy. That was definitely one of those cases. So what does a software architect do? In a nutshell, software architect provides leadership. This is, the big answer. We can probably stop here, have an early break, but of course there's more to this. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this talk is because I don't think it's readily apparent that leadership is a primary function of a software architect. It became very obvious to me when I joined an organization where leadership qualities by themselves held no value. The primary contribution that was valued was code, and because of that, organizational and architectural dysfunctions emerged. So today I want to talk about what kind of leadership software architect provides, what skills they need to provide it, and how to avoid certain common pitfalls. There are three types of leadership that a software architect provides: people, thought, and technical leadership. Software architect operates at the intersection of the three and utilizes all three to be successful. In order to be an effective leader in each area, there are specific skills that you need to develop that I will go through, starting with our first, and I would argue the most important one, people leadership. What exactly do you do in people leadership? In the word influence, what you're ultimately trying to do is get a buy-in for your solution. And that starts with explaining to the stakeholders what value the solution will bring. Value proposition is very important. And I heard it echoed in a few other presentations, because stakeholders will come at it with what's in it for me. When I use the word solution here, I use it very broadly. It can be anything from true technical software solution to change in business process, maybe change in technical process, such as your deployment process, to organizational or socio-technical change. Influencing involves a lot of conversations at a lot of different levels, from developers to project management to C-suite. It also involves sifting through a lot of feedback and incorporating it into your proposals, or having reasoned arguments why it doesn't have to be incorporated. After multiple cycles of this separating wheat from the chaff, what you ultimately end up with is a compromise, but one that delivers value to every part of the organization that it serves. And I'll stress that I think this is the most important one. If people don't listen or follow you, your solution won't see the light of day. So every tech conference has a set of famous quotes that gets brought out, and I've heard at least this one here already. I've heard several. I'm hoping that Conway's Law is familiar to most. Effectively, what Conway is saying is that org structure influences architecture. Of course, architect influences architecture very directly. She tries to shape it. However, architect can also influence architecture indirectly via influencing org structure, aligning teams to value streams, platforms, complex subsystems. There's a lot of interesting material on this out there, most notably a recent book called Team Topologies by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace, that talks about evolving teams for better solution delivery, better software delivery. You as an architect can bring this knowledge in and help shape the org and shape the architecture. The next area is growing new leadership, next set of architects. It's difficult to accomplish large objectives alone, and honestly, it's not that much fun. The best way to get another peer architect is to train one. Find someone who aspires to reach the next level and provide necessary guidance and opportunity to develop these skills that we're talking about now. Knowledge sharing is another important part of people leadership. Architect is often a hub of information. They're exposed to a broad range from technical to business, product, project management. They can meaningfully convey information to various functions. They also interpret information and understand potential impacts. In fact, I find myself doing a lot of this translation in my current position of What are the software implications of a particular business initiative? And these translations can get quite complex. Since architects have this information, it becomes incumbent upon them to ensure that team members have the right information at the right level and at the right time to make them successful in their initiatives. So what skills do you need in order to be an effective people leader? Well, funny as it sounds, it's going to be people skills. First, to influence, you need to understand motivation and come up with that personalized approach. Some people are going to be motivated by learning, others by recognition, some by building something cool and new. Teams are going to be motivated by different factors. Executive team may be motivated by revenue, marketing by getting product out in time for an industry event, regulatory team by compliance with new regs. So find the right approach in order to influence. Coaching and teaching skills are critical for growing talent and creating next generation of architects. Providing guidance and feedback rather than just doing everything yourself is a very important skill. Sometimes it's very tempting to do everything yourself. You need to delegate and support others as they work through problems without giving all the answers. You need to create room for experimentation and mistakes, and of course have tolerance for mistakes while setting guardrails to avoid catastrophic failures. Communication skills are very important. If you noticed, all skills here involve some level of communication, and even though they call it a soft skill, I'd say it's quite hard, as in difficult, to be a great communicator. What does it mean to be a great communicator? Well, it means engaging in healthy and constructive debate, putting together well-reasoned arguments, avoiding groupthink, listening and absorbing rather than reacting. It means tailoring your message to the audience and having the right amount of detail. I can talk about the same initiative to a development team and C-suite, and it's going to look very different in language and level of detail that I provide. And this skill is absolutely critical to being understood. I had an example of just how critical this skill is when a colleague of mine got elevated into a leadership position temporarily, and this colleague was a senior developer. When he got elevated into this position, his audience became a lot of executives from different functions, but he never adjusted his language. He spoke as if he was addressing a group of engineers in very technical terms. And frustration on both sides of the conversation was palpable. No one felt understood or like they were getting the right information that they needed. And this, of course, is not just the verbal skills. A good architect wants to write things down and understands the value of written word. This is probably counter to a lot of agile tenets out there of minimal documentation and code being the only documentation that you need. Anyone who said that has never been in an audit. You do not want to put your code in front of the auditor. Writing things down helps organizing and structuring your thoughts and allows everyone to level set and disseminate information effectively. You've probably all been in this meeting where you're bringing in a new problem, you're discussing it, everybody leaves the meeting understanding the problem, only to realize that next time you get together, everyone walked away with a slightly different understanding of that problem. Writing things down really helps to eliminate these kinds of issues from occurring. Now, I want to digress for a minute and talk about this concept of near enemy. I heard this concept used at another conference talk, and I liked it so much I decided to borrow it for my own. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So near enemy and far enemy concepts come from Buddhism. There's these 4 Buddhist virtues and their enemies. While the far enemy is obvious, it's the complete opposite of the virtue. Near enemy may look like that virtue, but differs from it in a subtle and dangerous way. Similarly, each leadership that I'll talk about today has a near enemy, something that looks like that leadership, but differs from it in a subtle and unhelpful way. So what is the near enemy of people leadership? It is functional management. Now, I want to be very clear. There is nothing wrong with functional management. In fact, it's a very necessary skill. Functional manager hires, fires, provides feedback, promotes, builds a team, works on career and skills development. In short, she's a people manager. She is also a manager of a specific function, let's say manufacturing, and is responsible for execution of projects that involve that function. This can mean another range of responsibilities from managing resources, budgets, timelines, processes, and technical aspects of the project. This is where it gets tricky. Pure functional management without influence component doesn't get you as far. Bringing it back to software, there's two types of architects, with teams and without, meaning those who manage functional teams and those who don't. I've seen both kinds. I've been both kinds. I would argue that being one without a team is more difficult because you really need to leverage your influence to get anything accomplished. However, when you have a team, it's easy to fall into the trappings of thinking that you can accomplish what you need with your position alone and without relying on influence heavily. So what does functional management look like without influence? Well, it looks like telling people what to do, task mastering. You may accomplish your objectives, but support for the decision would be grudging at best. And the effect of that is that decisions get reopened frequently, slowing down progress. And of course, position power extends to your team only. It doesn't really work on stakeholders or other cross-functional teams, which makes it a lot more difficult to get through a larger, broader project. If I contrast this with people management with influence, much of it is getting that buy-in, also known as convincing people what you're proposing is a good idea, which usually means really sharpening that value proposition and explaining the value that solution will bring. And secondly, and also very importantly, making people feel like they're part of the solution, which could mean being very generous with the credit for solution, up to the point of making others think that they came up with it, this kind of solution inception with other people. Moving on to our second leadership, technical leadership. How does a software architect lead in technology realm? First, by constant learning. I've heard this mentioned here today a few times. You have to know technology in order to make educated choices and understand trade-offs. We all know how fast technology moves. There's always something new, patterns, practices, trends, frameworks. How many JavaScript frameworks are out there? This constant learning, of course, comes paired with teaching and information sharing we talked about. In order for this knowledge to be applied, it can't be hoarded. Architect evangelizes to the team, shows the value of new things, and drives progress. Second, technical leadership takes shape of scaffolding projects. While you may not implement a project start to finish, creating a scaffold for implementation ensures that design materializes as envisioned and cements patterns. What the scaffold is really depends on the project. It can be anything: technology selection, data model, workflow or process definition, integration paradigm, API definition, service boundary, or any combination thereof. Since architecture is about important stuff, whatever that is, another famous quote, identify what is important or foundational to the project and scaffold it. Conversely, you can identify what is likely to go wrong and cause a bigger collapse and try to scaffold that. Third, architecture is about selecting a toolbox. I'll go back to my question of how many JavaScript frameworks are out there. Angular, React, Node, you can keep naming them, 5, 8, 10 maybe. How many do you need? 1. How do you know which one? Which one is better? Which one is better for a current project or long-term? How do you balance that with skills that you already have on the team or your ability to hire or train? Architects analyze tools, collaborate on tool selection, rollout, and training. Another important thing that they do kind of from the other end of the spectrum is they prevent tool proliferation. So just one JavaScript framework, not many. I had this happen with monitoring and logging tools. I don't know why, but anywhere I've been, there's never just one logging and monitoring tool. We had something like 4, New Relic, Splunk, Grafana. Did we need all of them? Probably not. But without an architect to lead the conversation, team members will bring in what they know and tools proliferate. What skills do you need to be a tech lead? Well, again, funny enough, you need technical skills, but let's break them down. So for learning skills, they teach from kindergarten and up. If you know the book, All I Really Need to Know, I Learned in Kindergarten. And these skills are abbreviated as 4 C's, which is critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, and collaboration. Notice that communication pops up here again. It is that important. For building a scaffold, you need your software engineering skills. There is a lot there, obviously. Software engineering encompasses a ton, but I'll summarize it as your foundational engineering skills, coding skills, plus tools and frameworks, plus best practice thinking. To fill out your tool box with right tools, your best friend is your analytical skills. You're serving the market, but it's not the same thing as going after the next shiny thing. Aside from technical need and fit, there are many more aspects to evaluate, such as maturity of the tool and your ability or willingness to become an early adopter. Sometimes if you're working in a highly regulated industry, you can't afford to take on a tool that hasn't passed the test of time. Other aspects are level of support you might get for the tool, licensing considerations, current skill set makeup of your team and your ability to hire or train, and whether these new skills are going to be something that uplifts your team or maybe does the opposite, makes them run for the hills. Of course, technical leadership has its own near enemy, and that near enemy is just being a really in the weeds individual contributor with hands on keyboard all the time. Now, just like there's nothing wrong with functional management, there's nothing wrong with being an individual contributor. That's an architect without a team. And of course, it's great to keep your software engineering skills sharp. I'll come back to that in just a minute. However, being really deep in the weeds and having tactical coding responsibilities, stories you need to deliver, bugs you need to fix, rarely leaves time for broader strategy. Remember that organization that I mentioned where leadership skills were not valued? Initially, I went along and started delivering tactically. I felt like this guy in the comic, and as long as I was deep in the weeds, I had no time to deal with anything strategic, not even something basic like tool selection for the team. And the moment I started working on strategic initiatives, I became a bottleneck for code delivery. But the question that I ask myself is, can I be an architect without coding every day? It is a hard question. My answer to that is yes, but with some conscious effort. In my experience, there were a few things that helped. First, doing proofs of concepts, greenfield project, new tech evaluation. All of these are variations on the theme of bringing in something new. You have the opportunity to go as deep or as shallow as you want, and the risk is fairly low because your code is not likely going to go in production, not without significant retrofit. So if you have an opportunity to execute on those, take it. Second one is keep a pet project, that is. I think most of us have this one project or product that we've heavily contributed to some time ago, but somehow we're still shepherding it to this day. You're already familiar with the code base, and occasional implementation of a new feature pattern will keep you sharp. The last one is not a desirable occurrence, but it does happen when an architect has to roll up her sleeves and start coding to rescue a project from failing. When it does happen, however, it gives you an opportunity to level up in a high pressure situation. So even though you may not code every day, if you can keep the sign pattern of going deep into code and coming back out to strategic, you can continue to maintain your skills. Finally, our last leadership bubble, thought leadership. This is your strategic leadership, which starts with big picture thinking. Architects live at big picture level. They harmonize requirements, technologies, solutions. Start by understanding what the big picture is, how it evolved, learn some past history, any bumps and bruises that were acquired along the way, and how to avoid them. Keep in mind, this is always a fine balancing act. You want to know the history and the past, but you don't want to be so bogged down by it that you fear change. Once you have the big picture, roadmap its evolution. You want to have a roadmap that goes beyond your next release, but doesn't go too far. I've never seen a 3-year roadmap that actually worked all the way through the 3-year time frame. Things change way too fast. To me, the most useful planning period is sometimes 6 months to a year, and this roadmap is going to be a living document that an architect will maintain and evolve. Next, champion process. Process tends to be a dirty word in software engineering. Well, remember, move fast and break things. However, having come from a regulated industry where mistakes can be very costly and impact people's lives and well-being, I've come to appreciate the role of software development process, and I champion it in the organization. Process gets associated with something very heavy-handed, waterfall-like, full of documentation no one maintains. It does not have to be the case. Process is there to catch you when you fall, not if, because mistakes will invariably get made. And process is there to instill good engineering discipline, having code reviews, getting peer feedback, following best practices. The key point to remember is that process serves developers, not the other way around. It's up to software architect to continuously evaluate and improve process so that it works for your specific organization or industry. Process in a small growing org is not going to be the same as that in a large mature org, regulated versus unregulated industry, and so on. In short, architect champions process and makes it another tool in their toolbox. Last, set culture and values. Management consultant Peter Drucker once said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Does it mean that all the strategy stuff I just talked about is not important? Not at all. But what it does speak to is how important culture is and how critical it is to success of organization and projects. Software architects should have values, and they're in the unique position to build, change, or influence culture in their organization. Here's where being an architect with the team also makes it a little bit easier to set culture, at least within your own team, and especially at those formative stages, hiring, onboarding. However, culture within a single team is often not enough. No single team is an island. An architect should work to influence culture across teams in the entire organization. What are the values that a software architect might have? The answer, as with most things in software architecture, is it depends. I have a few that I live by, but I would like you to think about what you consider your North Star and explain why it's important to yourself or others. So let's talk about skills for this area. These are not skills in the strictest sense of the word. They're more character traits, but they still require development. One unifying theme here is drive for constant improvement and being a change agent. You're never satisfied with status quo. You strive to make things better. You are able to use any experience, success or failure, or anything in between, for learning. You want to understand why something succeeded or failed. You can draw conclusions and course correct if needed. You have flexibility, tolerance for failure, we talked about that, curiosity and willingness to experiment. And importantly, you have some emotional intelligence. You're a change agent, and change is hard for everyone. You want to be sensitive to how teams absorb and process changes. These traits might sound counter to someone process-oriented and structured, but they really aren't. They are foundational and really is a starting point to building a good functional process. Of course, we should talk about near enemy of thought leadership. In this case, it is ivory tower architect. Ivory tower architect makes architecture an academic exercise without real and practical value attached to it. Remember that at the end of the day, you have to ship working code that brings business value. If you don't have that, architecture has no value. And ivory tower architects often get enamored with the right way of doing things rather than balancing out right with pragmatic or realistic. Architecture is never a clean and pretty picture. There's always trade-offs and compromises that need to be made. One sign that you may have an ivory tower architect is that they make architecture process exclusionary, creating committees and approval boards. Architecture is a lot more democratic. If you ask me who architects, I'd say everyone, from product to software quality. But architect just happens to be the one who drives the process, who's responsible for producing the artifacts, and is accountable for the results. The other sign of ivory tower is process for the sake of process. Places where you see process as bureaucratic, used to check boxes rather than provide practical value, or reactive, where mistakes get dealt with by adding more process, is also typical of that academic mindset. To avoid that, always ask yourself, what does a particular decision or process change bring to the table? If the answer is unclear or none, avoid it. So, what do architects actually do in practical terms, other than press the proverbial computer buttons? I'll give you a 4-phase process and artifacts for each phase. Now, this is going to look very pretty and neat in PowerPoint because everything always looks better in PowerPoint. But the process is not that linear, and there are loops and returns and phases for different phases happen to be different size and scale. First thing that architect will do is get to the core of a problem, performing analysis that supports their problem definition. This is typically a big task that requires eliciting information from multiple stakeholders. That's, again, your communication skills. Creating a succinct and meaningful problem statement is critical to building a solution and success of a project. This is how you know where you're going, what you're solving. For example, we're losing $25 million annually due to incorrect billing practices is a great problem statement because you know exactly where you want to go from there. You want to stop losing $25 million annually, or maybe bring that number down to something business is willing to live with. The artifacts produced in this phase are problem statement, some supporting analysis. If you're giving real numbers, which you almost always should, you should back them up with data, and some as-is documentation that may show where problems are originating. If you have a destination, you have a starting point as well. This phase is where you create your solution proposal, or likely multiple proposals, since as it goes through a vetting process, it will evolve, and sometimes significantly. This is the time for diagrams. We knew there'd be time for diagrams, and any other to-be documentation. There are several other very important things that happen at this phase. If there's any technology selection to be made, it happens here, along with any proofs of concepts that are needed to vet the technology or the entire solution. The other important output of this phase is names for concepts, or ubiquitous language. Most of this ubiquitous language will be discovered in first phase, but for anything new that you're introducing, this is where those concepts get named and get added to your ubiquitous language. This phase is where you take your solution from concept or proof of concept to production. Consulting architects don't always stay for this phase. And the artifacts here are obvious. This is where you're building your scaffold for the project, and if possible or necessary, actual production code. But the most important thing that you're doing in this phase is managing change. As implementation starts, you will discover assumptions that have not been voiced, requirements creep, technology limitations previously undiscovered, and you will need to change and adjust to compensate for these new discoveries. The last phase, which is always the longest, is enhancement and maintenance. These chevrons are not drawn to scale, otherwise this one would take up most of the slide. Code is running in production, and you get to live with consequences of your decisions, which is what distinguishes an in-house architect versus a consultant. The measure of success is not whether you have to make changes. The answer to that question is always yes. The measure of success is how big of a change you need to make and how easily you can make it. So at the start of this presentation, I talked about having a tagline for software architects. I know the analogy with civil architects and building a house has been used many times, but it's a good one for a reason. There are many moving parts behind the facade, It's your last diagram of the day, which is a plumbing diagram. And visualizing those things that are hidden and putting them together into a working solution, the kind that doesn't make you take a cold shower when somebody runs a dishwasher, is what an architect does. So my take on this tagline is making the invisible visible. I would love to hear from all of you. If you have a better tagline, send it to me. I may use it in my next presentation with credit to author, of course. So, in summary, software architect provides leadership in 3 major areas: people, technical, and thought. And if you've developed the skills needed, and if you're leading in those areas, you might already be an architect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonya, for your talk. We received like really many comments, so how amazing your talk was. So I think we'll get a chance to discuss it like more thoroughly a bit later on our Q&A session, because we're a little bit late for now. So I'm really thankful for your presentation, and see you in half an hour. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. So it's now time for the last talk in our masses block. And so last but not least, I would like to introduce you Dave Nunez. So solutions
Hi.
architect, from IBM, with the topic, how do I become an architect? So Dave, in your bio mentioned that you have like more than 25 years of experience of delivering different IT projects. So could you tell me what was like the most interesting project for you? Just like a couple of words.
Yeah, I guess what I've done some sort of really complex projects for customs projects where we're actually having to deal with really complex business processes and integrating with a lot of different systems, and massive transformation projects at telcos where so many systems are moving to different platforms all at once. And as an architect, you've actually got to work with all of the other architects and try and still evolve your architecture while things are moving at a really fast pace. So yeah, I have a lot of experience working in complex projects.
Okay, sounds great. So I won't take your precious time. So I'm adding your presentation and saying bye-bye for the next half an hour. Good luck.
Great, no worries. Okay, thank you. So hello everybody. So what I'm going to talk today is just run through about how you can progress as a developer into becoming an architect. So what I want to cover is just really the role of the architect, the skills that an architect would actually need, the mindset of an architect, considerations that you would need to take into account when you start a new project. Also, I'm going to cover reference architectures and architectural decisions. So I've got quite a lot to get through, so I'll just get started. Okay, so this is my definition of what an architect does. So an architect is given a business problem that needs to be solved by technology. They select the best architecture to address application, data, and workload requirements within the budget that has been allocated to solve the business problem. So typically, a customer will have a number of initiatives that they may want to progress with to possibly to increase profit, to reduce operational costs. It may be that they actually want to try and provide better services to their customers, maybe by streamlining some business processes. So the way that they could actually target some of these initiatives is to select a few business cases for these initiatives, get funding for one of these initiatives, and if that initiative gets approved, a project will get set up, a team will get allocated, and you, as the architect, will get allocated to solve that business problem via defining a solution architecture. So here's an example business problem that will actually lead to a solution architecture getting allocated. So in my example, I've got an insurance company. They receive a large number of phone calls from customers that are simple queries about its insurance products and how to submit an insurance claim. As a result, other more complex customer calls are being queued up as there are not enough call center staff to handle the number of phone calls. And this is leading to unhappy customers waiting on their phones. Is there a way to reduce the load on the call center staff but still provide customers with the information they need? In this example, the insurance company's senior leadership team, they approved funding for a project to develop a chatbot that can answer a lot of the simple customer queries about the insurance company's products and the claim process, and develop this as an MVP. But obviously, over time, they can actually expand on the functionality of that chatbot. But the chatbot is expected to reduce the number of phone calls that the insurance company's call center needs to handle, but they can still provide customers with the information they need. And you've been allocated as a solution architect to this chatbot project. What are some of the things that you would need to think about then? Okay, so as a chatbot architect, there's a wide range of scope that you would actually need to address. So you would need to understand the business and technical requirements that the chatbot solution architecture would need to meet. You'd need to understand your chatbot application architecture. So you'd need to actually design it. Is there a reference architecture that you can use as a start? And I'll come to reference architectures later. You need to understand what back-end systems does your chatbot application need to integrate with, and how, over what protocols. What is the deployment architecture for your chatbot application? If it's going to be deployed on the cloud, on what platform is it going to be deployed on? How your chatbot application handle availability and scalability. So if you're deploying it on the cloud and one of the availability zones goes down, how will your chatbot application deal with that? How does it scale? What are the chatbot application's network requirements to connect to the backend systems? So how much data goes in and out of your application? So you'd need to also understand if you do have different data requirements at different times of the day. So what are the network bandwidth requirements in order to cater for that data? What's the chatbot application's data model? So where's the data stored? What data does it actually need to hold? What are your data backup requirements? What are all the security considerations you need to determine to secure your application and its data? How are application logging and monitoring of the chatbot application be performed? So if there's a problem in production with the chatbot application, how would anybody know about it? How's logging and monitoring performed? How's your chatbot application developed, tested, and deployed? So what's the development environment to actually develop and test the application? What are the CI and CD pipeline components that you need to build and deploy your chatbot application? And how your chatbot application meet the non-functional requirements? So moving from a developer role into an architecture role, you can see there's a much wider scope of considerations that you need to take into account. So I'm just going to run on to the next slide. I was actually just looking at the skills that you would actually need to try and address some of these questions. Okay, so what skill does a solution architect need? You need a good understanding of the business problem domain. So you need to understand the reason for you developing the solution architecture. You need to understand the business problem you're actually trying to solve. You need a good understanding of available technologies and architectural approaches in order to develop the solution architecture that will resolve the business problem. Now, this is a quite short statement here, but it does actually mean quite a lot. You need to have an understanding over application architecture, security, infrastructure, networking, data, integration approaches, and all of the available technologies around, CI/CD pipelines. You may have to be dealing, depending on what you're solutioning, you may be dealing with AI, you may be dealing with cloud, you may be dealing with blockchain, you may be migrating an existing application to the cloud, or you may be developing a cloud-native application. So depending on the scope of your solution, there's a wide set of skills and knowledge that you actually need to get across. But not all architects are expected to know everything. And what happens as you start working on solution architecture, you do collaborate with other architects around that. So architects that may have some domain knowledge, so maybe around identity and access management that you don't necessarily have, you collaborate with those architects and they will support you in evolving your architecture. Okay, you also need to be able to document the overall structure and behavior of your solution architecture. And this approach is really a diagrammatical way of representing your architecture and what we call architectural views. Typically by using a modeling language and tooling, could be UML, Archimate, which is an architectural description language. It's really for enterprise architecture, but you can use it for software architecture, or just actually describing your solution architecture using boxes and lines. There's really been, my experience has been, there's been a move away for architects using UML and Archimate and actually taking a more, what we call a just enough architecture approach, using boxes and lines created in even its Visio or Draw.io, and using modeling approaches, say for the C4 model, which is where you just use four views to describe your architecture. You can Google C4 model to actually to get some information around that. But there's no hard and fast rules about what approach you should actually take, provided that the diagrams, the views that you're actually creating are just providing the information you actually need. So typically you would need to describe your application architecture, your deployment architecture, integration, etc. And we also typically create a system context diagrams, which is normally a diagram that has your solution described as a circle in the middle of the diagram, and then you just basically show all of the various systems and user entities that integrate with your system. And that's a really good way to understand your scope. You also need strong leadership, communication, negotiation skills, because you're going to be a technical leader, so you have to influence people and negotiate with other architects. You may need to negotiate with your business stakeholders if some of the requirements that they actually want you to meet in your solution architecture turn out to be quite costly. So you actually need to be able to communicate your views across. You may need to run workshops. You may need to lead other architects through the review of your architecture. So you need to put yourself forward as a strong leader. You also need resilience, because things change, and they can change quite rapidly when you're developing your solution, particularly if your solution is integrating with other solution architectures developed by other architects, because their architectures could also be evolving. Yours are also evolving. You need to work on how to integrate with their solutions, but if their solutions are changing as well, you may also need to adapt your solution as their architecture changes. That's what's happening to myself on my current project, where we've got a number of platforms that have been migrated to the cloud. So I'm working with a set of architects. We're actually trying to understand and architect how our solutions together will actually integrate together on the cloud. You need task management. So you need good task management skills, because you need to keep track of all of the tasks, architectural decisions that you actually need to resolve. And you may be running workshops, you may need to run presentations, you may have meetings to run through your solution with architects. You may also have to catch up with your stakeholders to review some requirements. So there's a lot of things that in a day that you will need to keep track of, and make sure that you're actually on top of all of your work. But you may also need to lead a development team as well. So you may be working on a proof of concept to test some technology, and you may also be working and leading a development team. Also, if you're working on a small project, you may be the architect and the technical lead. So I've been that role on some small projects. But you also, if you're on a much larger project, you could be one of many architects. So you have to be flexible just to actually deal with the role that you're actually given at any time. Okay, so how do you behave like an architect? What is the architecture mindset? You need to apply intellectual rigor to all aspects of your solution architecture. You need to challenge your own thinking. So even when you've actually made a decision, think carefully about whether it's the right decision, and do not be afraid to actually change your decision. And because you just need to make sure that your solution architecture is the best architect you're putting forward. You need to lead by example, because you are the technical authority for your solution. You're expected to be a technical leader, so you need to act like one. You need to be assertive, not passive, but that doesn't mean aggressive. You just need to be confident and be able to put your views across, and do not hide in the shadows. What I'm meaning here is that don't speak up, and make sure that you're noticed, and actually people are aware that you are actually the architect for a solution. Because if you're passive in design sessions with other architects, there is a possibility that they could make decisions for you if you are not strong enough to be able to put forward your case. So you always need to be assertive, not aggressive, and just speak your mind. You need to be comfortable with uncertainty. So as your solution architecture evolves, there's going to be areas that you know about, that you're going to be certain about, but there's going to be areas that you're going to be uncertain about. So you might, an example of uncertainty is that you might have a technical component within your scope, but you're not familiar with. It may be that you're architecting your first cloud application, and you understand you've got to integrate with the identity and access management system at the company, and you may not have experience with identity access management or the security aspects of the solution. But here you would actually collaborate with the architects of that domain, say the identity and access management domain or the security domain, and they will support you in providing the content for your solution architecture. So there's other aspects to make areas of your solution certain. You may need to do some additional research. You may need to perform a proof of concept or collaborate with other architects in order to confirm architectural decisions about the uncertain aspects. And as you go through the process, the uncertain aspects of your solution architecture then become certain. But as a first architect, it can be quite daunting understanding the scope of what you need to do and knowing that you may not necessarily know all of the technology that your solution has to encompass. Okay, you need to treat everyone with respect who you collaborate with. Be open to constructive criticism about your solution architecture. Do not get defensive. Build trusting relationships with those who you collaborate with. So when you're reviewing and working with other architects, you may get feedback around your solution architecture where people may point out things that you haven't considered, and you would need to really be humble about this feedback and just act on it, and as necessary resolve your architecture. Don't get defensive because it doesn't help anybody, and really you want to develop the best architecture for your company. Have confidence in yourself that you will succeed in your role. Be aware of and accept any limitations you have, i.e. skills gaps, and develop a plan to resolve those gaps. So you may have the technical knowledge to do the job, but it may be that negotiation, communication, the leadership skills, you may need some support there. But that's where you just develop a plan. You understand that, okay, you may need some some training in negotiation or how to run workshops. But all you do is just go through that particular training. Look at the skills gaps that you've got, come up with a plan to resolve them, and then act on that plan. Okay, so how do I transition from a developer role into an architect role? Let your employer know that you want to transition, first of all, from a developer to an architect, so they can support you in your career path transition and provide you with the training you need. Try and find an architect in your workplace who will agree to mentor you. Understand any technical and non-technical skills gaps that you might have. Develop a plan to resolve those gaps and act on the plan. Study online courses, which might be paid courses or free courses, to help you resolve those gaps. Consider studying and certifying as an architect in the area you want to focus on, which, say, if you want to certify as an Azure cloud architect, go through that certification process, because that will help you stand out. Certifications help you stand out from the competition when looking for a job. And join a software architecture meetup in your area to connect with other architects and learn from them. Because networking is great. You get to find out what other architects are up to. And typically at these kind of meetup groups, people will actually run presentations, so you get some skills transition as well. And if a meetup group doesn't exist in your area, then consider setting one up. Okay, what should an architect consider when starting on a new project? Okay, you need to understand your business and technical stakeholders. You need to understand who they are and connect with them regularly, such that as your architecture evolves, you can review the architecture with them and get early feedback. You need to understand the business and technical requirements of your solution. And if some of the requirements that you've been provided with are not clear, run meetings and workshops to clarify any information that is unclear. The risk here is that if you've got an unclear requirement, your solution architecture may actually not meet that requirement because you may have misunderstood what that requirement meant. So always get anything unclear clarified. Understand the review process to get your architecture approved. So the first thing that I do when I start on a new project is find out who needs to review my architecture at the company, engage with them straight away, introduce myself, and then work with them as my architecture evolves. Whenever you attend a workshop meeting, make sure all actions, decisions get documented so there's a record of what was agreed, so that a few months down the track, you've got evidence of what has actually been agreed. Request an example solution architecture from your client as a guide to understand the level of detail the client expects you to document in your own solution architecture. So your company might be documenting all of the solution architectures in Confluence. So just ask for an example of a solution architecture that's already been created, so you understand the level of detail you need to document. Don't document your solution architecture in secret. Get it reviewed regularly so that you get confidence in it is meeting its objectives. An architecture that nobody is aware of is not an architecture, as it does not exist. What I'm saying here is that don't document your architecture without getting other people involved in it. So if you're to document your architecture and you didn't review it as it was being evolved, and then you go to the company to actually get it reviewed to go through final review, all of the architects that review it, if they haven't actually been involved in the discussions with you as you evolve your architecture, it's likely that a lot of the decisions you've made will be incorrect, and you will have to potentially rework a large area of your solution architecture, which then could actually lead to a delay in the project. So get your architecture reviewed early. So when you start creating some of your architectural decisions, or some of your, say, your deployment model, your architectural application component model, get things reviewed early such that the architects who are going to review your solution are involved in that journey with you. Don't lose sight that your solution architecture needs to lead to working software, so it must be technically viable. Determine and document the technical risks in your solution and the corresponding risk mitigation for each technical risk identified. So a solution architecture is not a theoretical solution to a problem. It actually needs to lead to working software. So take that into account when you're developing your solution architecture. You're not just trying to provide a document to hit a milestone. You're trying to provide a document that is actually going to lead to working software. So take that into account. When I'm saying determine and document the technical risks in your solution, these are things that can go wrong. So a technical risk in a solution, say for a cloud application, it could be that one of the availability zones goes down. So the risk mitigation that you would document is that you would deploy your cloud application across multiple availability zones. So that's an example of a technical risk and the risk mitigation, and you would document all of those problem areas and how they will be resolved. Apply industry best practices, e.g. reference architecture patterns when developing your solution architecture. So look for work that's already been done in the industry. Look for, I'll come to reference architectures a little bit later, but essentially you may not necessarily, you don't really want to start from scratch around developing your solution architecture if there's work out there that you can use as a basis to start. So always look at what's actually been developed in the industry, for instance, reference architectures, when you develop your solution architecture. Determine what's in scope, what's out of scope of your solution. Identify the entities and interfaces outside your scope that your system must interact with. Use a system context diagram to describe this information. So, as I mentioned, a system context diagram is a really good way to describe diagrammatically the scope of your solution. And that's an early diagram that you can get reviewed just to confirm that the systems that your solution needs to integrate with, and also the user entities. Identify and document assumptions, technical risks and mitigations, solution constraints, dependencies. All assumptions must be eventually resolved as you evolve your architecture. So when you develop your solution, you will actually be listing out assumptions that you're making around your solution architecture. But you need to validate your assumptions. You can't go into build and into production where you still have assumptions listed in your architecture. All assumptions must be turned into architectural decisions as early as possible. Document all architectural decisions and get them reviewed and approved by your stakeholders. Okay, so what's a reference architecture? A reference architecture is a predefined architectural pattern or set of patterns proven for use in particular business and technical contexts. Reference architectures are available from companies such as IBM, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, etc., for you to use as best practice guidance when developing your solution architecture. Here's a list of some of the example IBM reference architectures. So, but typically there's also reference architectures available from, also SAP, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, etc., Oracle that you can use as a start for your architecture. Okay, so this is an example. This is the IBM chatbot reference architecture diagram. So if you were developing a chatbot, so this is a good diagram that will actually provide you with the overall architecture of a chatbot application. But the reference architecture is not just a diagram. Typically, there's best practice guidance that's provided with the reference architecture, and you may also get code examples as well. So reference architectures are a good way for you to start. They're a blueprint for you to start your architecture, so that you're actually developing your architecture with proven best practice experience from the industry. Okay, so what is an architectural decision? An architectural decision is used to document how you will resolve a business technical problem where there are multiple options to resolve the problem. And you're likely to need to make multiple architectural decisions as you evolve your solution architecture. The reason why you need to document an architectural decision is that it's a record of the decisions that you've made to evolve your solution architecture, such that, and these decisions do need to get agreed by your stakeholders, which would be your business and your technical stakeholders at the company, because there may be multiple options that you come up with to resolve a particular business or technical problem. And what you need to do here is actually document the approach as an architectural decision. And there's templates available on the internet for an architectural decision, but it's typically documented as a table where you would actually describe the problem, describe all the options that you've investigated to resolve that problem. You use a set of attributes to compare each of the options. So it may be over cost, technical complexity, ability to implement it in a project timeframe. And you compare each option against the attributes to identify the best option. You document your rationale for your selected option and why the other solution options were discounted. I've also got here, consider the cost of technical debt. So technical debt is a concept in software development that reflects the implied cost of additional rework caused by choosing an easy solution now instead of using a better approach that will take longer. Essentially what this means is that you may need to make an architectural decision to go with an option that enables you to deliver your architecture within budget, within the time frame, but it may not be the best architectural solution. The best architectural solution may be a lot more costly, and it may be more strategic for the company to adopt that particular option. However, it may be that best option is far too expensive, and also it cannot be delivered within the time frame. So you may need to make an architectural decision that says, okay, I'm having to make a short-term architectural decision, and I understand that maybe technical debt, if the company makes a strategic decision in the future to go with the better option. And also get your architectural decisions reviewed and approved by your stakeholders. So that's the end of my talk, and I wish you best wishes in your career journey as an architect.
Dave, are you here?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So are you finished with your talk, yeah?
Yeah, all good, all good.
Great, thank you for your talk, because we are a little bit late, so sorry for inconvenience our dear audience, but we are almost ready to start with our Q&A session. So Dave, I would remove for a couple of minutes because I have to do a really important announcement for our audience. So 1 second. So people, I guess you had a great time with our speakers. And before we start our Q&A session, I want to share with you some important and exciting news for the whole community, because Geekle is moving to a new format. So I mentioned a couple of times that all video recordings will be available for you on our new platform. So now I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about what it is. So starting from today, everyone can join Geekle educational platform to get access to all our amazing events, so both past and upcoming. Also, we are starting new series of episodes focused on different aspects of developers' growth. For example, next weekend, if I'm not mistaken, we're gonna hear a small workshop, I would say, from our speaker from NASA, Mike, and it's gonna be amazing, I think. No other options. And to sum up, so what benefits do you get by joining our community? So that is unique content that is constantly updated, videos from past summits by Geekle, ability to upgrade your knowledge and skills in the industry of interest, new possibilities of networking, because now our community is more than 60,000 of members, and of course we are gonna grow. We are like dreaming of that, and of course we do that. And the main thing I want to share with you is that all attendees who are now with us and watching our software architecture summit, so you will get 21 days of free access to this platform. And now I'm gonna share this link to the chat, and now I will add our speakers back to the stream. So Dave, Anna, Andrea, and Sonya, thank you one more time for your amazing talks we had. So I think we are ready for questions now. So please, if you have any questions regarding previous talks or just want to discuss something, so I will waiting for them in our comments in YouTube. Before that, I would add some. Okay, so first of all, how are you after your talks? So share me a little bit of your experience.
It was great. I'm always relieved after my talk. Deep breath.
Yeah, I was really pleased with the level of engagement. I saw a lot of comments coming through. I had pre-recorded mine, so it was rare that I was actually able to comment while I was presenting. So I don't usually get to do that. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's a good experience. It's a good experience. Also, sort of collaborating with other people, because we're all in different parts of the world as well. And being able to put this together and for it to function so smoothly is great.
Yeah, I always prefer to be face to face, but during the current situation of the whole world, I think the format is amazing, and it promotes as well like this kind of engagement that is amazing.
Yeah, definitely missed the in person, but this is the next best thing.
Yeah.
Is it yours first like online event like that, or did you have this experience?
No, that's first for me.
Yeah,
I've participated in maybe 6, I don't know, half a dozen or so online conferences. Yeah, and it's neat to see all the different platforms and tools that are emerging to kind of help facilitate collaboration. But yeah, it's fantastic for getting a wide audience, and I think it absolutely is something that is great going forward. But like everybody else here, I can't wait until I can see my friends. When you speak a lot, you tend to get like a conference circuit group of friends, and it's been nice to connect with people online, but miss the face-to-face.
Cool, thank you for sharing your experience. And I would also like to remind everyone, actually our audience, that we are gonna have a giveaway soon. So after our Q&A session, so if you ask a question to the speaker, put a hashtag ticket for question, and you'll get a chance to take a free ticket for our upcoming events. And actually, I've captured a couple of questions from the previous sessions. So what is the best open or free or professional software architecture tool would you recommend? So I think that was a question actually originally to Sonya, but if you have anyone to add something here.
Yeah, I can kick it off. I don't know that I'm a good tools person. I am a big fan of use the tools that you're most comfortable with. I heard, Dave, I think this was you who said, use anything for documenting your architecture as long as your consumers understand it. I very much subscribe to that philosophy. So I don't recommend any specific tools. Choose whatever is easiest and most accessible for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been dealing with architects who are using, some are using Visio, some are using Draw.io, some are using Giphy, some are using Enterprise Architect. It's like, there's a lot of free software out there, and I think as long as the diagrams that you're creating are actually providing the information that they need to they need to provide, I think that's all that you need to do, all that's actually needed. I think there's definitely been a move away, from my experience. I like to, get your own experiences as well. I think my experience has been there's a move away from using like Archimate and UML into just, more of even like a boxes and lines approach, just to actually just quickly get the diagrams created with regards to your application modeling and your deployment models. And I find also that there's been different approaches. There's like the C4 model. There's something that we're using at IBM as well, just to create the architecture just in using 4 views.
There's a tool, Nat Price introduced me to it. I don't know the original author, but it's on GitHub. It's a command line tool for architecture decision records. And we're big fans of taking the approach of living documentation, so keeping as much of the documentation close to the code base as possible. And so ADRs are a really good way to do that because, Dave, like you had mentioned in your talk, you want to document as much as you can. And so this provides a living documentation as commit messages and things like that that's tightly coupled with the code base, because sometimes, the UML diagrams, when we create them outside of that, it can be harder to reference and keep in sync. So those are tools that we use.
Okay, thank you. And I think here's a comment. What about Structurizer? Have you experienced working with this tool?
I haven't.
Yeah, I have heard about it. I think Structurizer may actually be used for C4 modeling. So yeah, I haven't actually used it myself though, but I think I have come across that modeling tool. I've heard of that modeling tool.
Okay, here's interesting question from our audience. So question for everyone. So should architects kind of micromanage developers? So should they care about the final implementation of their architecture? So
I think there's two different things there. One is micromanaging and another one is caring about the final implementation. I think they should care about final implementation of architecture, absolutely. And if there were agreed upon decisions, the architects and developers should hold each other accountable for sticking to those decisions. That, however, does not apply micromanagement to me.
Yeah, I would say if you scratched out micromanage and said collaborate, I would be all on board.
Yeah.
What I would say about this is like every hat has its own roles and responsibilities. So micromanage is not the best strategy to work in a team. Like it's currently really useful to structure teams on a multifunctional fashion, so everybody can contribute from its own point of view. I really think that both of the roles can benefit from really interesting conversations regarding the solution and how to take decisions to the final implementation.
Yeah, and I think the closer that they can work together on a daily basis, the better. So group pairing sessions, doing code katas together, practicing refactoring and learning how you make decisions together. Coding as an ensemble is a regular practice. I think those can all go a long way to building trust.
Cool, sounds like great advice. So, and here one more question comes to all of you. So what's your favorite source to stay updated about new trends and emerging technologies in software architecture world? Interesting question.
Okay, what I can start talking a little bit about that. The sources are endless. We have LinkedIn that you can follow, web pages from the main technology providers of the market. I think it's always a great source because they are gonna share like the state of art for all the solutions. What else? There's so many different communities as well discussing different topics that it's a really hard question to answer. It all depends what you should focus, what are your interests. So as I mentioned on my talk, like the thing that I keep on my mind is like to be open to any kind of information regarding technology, because even if we feel that it doesn't fit to our role nowadays, at some point it could be really useful and could join a lot of new architectures. And we have plenty of new technologies being aggregated to the solution. So everything is always evolving, and no source could be just dismissed considering that. And it all depends the focus, because we have a lot of niche information as well, depending on the topics you are interested in.
Yeah, you mentioned communities. One of the ones that I felt really at home in is the domain-driven design community. I feel like I learned so much there because it is a cross between architecture and development and understanding the domain and linguistics and philosophy even, and collaboration. And so that's one place where when I participate in different events or kind of follow the literature around there, I always get a nugget of something like really interesting that I don't know that I necessarily would have found if I was like really specific, like a tech stack or a tool or something like that. So.
Yeah, I love community of practice of domain-driven design. I happen to be a very unstructured and eclectic reader, from anything from Wired magazine to some very niche and specific health IT blogs. So yes, anything that works for you. And what's nice sometimes is random recommendations that pan out to be really interesting. So it don't always go to things that you know. Sometimes try out something new.
Yeah, I agree. Just be open to all sources of new information and look at what you're interested in and passionate about.
Great. And here is one more question. So how much overlap is there between business analyst and software architect?
I think to my previous comment about domain-driven design, I think that there is a significant overlap, because you want to make sure that the terms that you're using when you're designing your system are the ones that are actually used by the domain experts. And the tighter that collaboration is between business analysts or domain experts and the solutions architects, the developers, the more you trust each other, the more you're using your language, then the better your system is going to be.
Yeah.
Here is like one more question I really like. So what would you say is the hardest part of being an architect?
Sometimes I get tired of explaining things that I feel everybody should know, because I've explained it so many times before, but I have to keep reminding myself that the audience is new every time. And what I find really interesting is when you talk to business, I think it's been said a few times now that we should speak business language. There's not really a requirement from the other side. So business people don't want to know software engineering, and keeping that always in the back of my head and saying, I need to explain how this process works over and over again, because they just don't know at the level where they can make right decisions. Sometimes that gets hard after a time. It feels like, oh, I've done this before. But the offset to it is there's always something new to learn. Even though like, I can go from place to place and think, oh, I've solved this before, there's always some new and interesting twist on it. So it doesn't get boring.
I think also, so for me, I think the hardest part is accepting you've got the responsibility of designing this solution, and you don't want it to fail. And I think dealing with doubt is I think is a hard thing sometimes. That you want to make sure that what you're doing is correct, but you're the person leading this, so you're the person that if things actually do fail, if you do run into problems, you're the person that has to resolve it and sort it out. So there's a lot of unknowns which may actually, come up in the future, which could come through performance testing or even after it goes into production. And you don't know what those unknowns are. You don't really know what you're going to have to deal with, but you've got to be prepared that you're going to have to, you're responsible for this solution, and you're accepting of the fact that you're going to deal with it. I think so. That's the hardest thing. It's not knowing what is going to come up that you're going to have to deal with, and how big is the problem that you're going to have to deal with. But just knowing that you're going to deal with it and take responsibility, I think is the thing that you need to do. But I think that's when the challenging things that I think would start with a new architect is not necessarily understanding that they actually sort of need to go through that and accept that basically all problems stop with them. They have to be able to deal with a lot of challenging situations. And yeah, that can be quite daunting, I think, for a new architect. But as we're all experienced, we've gone through a lot of pain as architects ourselves, dealing with lots of different problems. So we've got some experience in what can actually happen. But I think that's one of the hardest things I've found over the years.
Okay, thank you. And here is one more question we need to hear your opinion for. So, do you think software architect role is being replaced with senior developer role?
I think they're. Oh, go ahead, Sonya.
I think there's not a hard line between the two. So I don't know if I would call it replaced. I certainly hope that any developer who wants to elevate and step up to a bigger picture has an opportunity to do so. I welcome it. So I wouldn't call it replaced.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that, similar how, we've got DevOps, which was a very tight collaboration between developers and operations. And we recognize that kind of became its own thing. I think that's kind of where I'm seeing it, that it's, not necessarily replacing, but recognizing that in order for things to go really well, the collaboration has to be really, really tight. And I think that when you have those types of transitions, what do we call that? I think that's where we are, where it's like, I don't know quite how to define it. So sometimes you have solutions architects who act more like developers and kind of that's their role. And sometimes it's the other way around. Yeah. But I think functionally, it's all about working together and collaborating.
Yeah, and it depends on what the organization needs at any given time. If you're in a startup, it's going to look very different than if you're at IBM, Facebook. You guys tell me.
Yeah, it's definitely different. You're right. Whether you're in a startup environment or working like in a bank, working as an architect at a bank, where it may be a bit more structured.
Thank you. And so what do you think, what is next step in your career after being a solutions architect? Any suggestions?
I don't know. I would say that life is pretty exciting working as a solutions architect. We constantly deal with really different environment ecosystems, customers, governance models, completely different architectures, considering all the complexity of hybrid environments. So I think as you keep looking at all the experience you have, we all the different challenges. And for example, nowadays I work in Latin America. So I work with a lot of different countries. And it's amazing to work with different types of structure, knowledge, the way also culture influences the organizations, and how many different things we can learn with different ecosystems. So, in my opinion, it keeps fun on the way.
So has anyone add something to Anna?
I think it just depends on what your goals are, right? I think a very natural next step, if you want to then lead your own business and you have your own ideas, you could go out and venture on your own. I think also CTO is kind of another natural next step, or VP of engineering, where then you're kind of looking not only at the architecture itself, but then also leading the team in terms of additional strategy. And at the same time, you may not want that kind of management piece. And I think one of the kind of myths is that the only path is towards management. But I think you can also, I've seen more and more organizations create principal or master engineer or something like that. So it just depends on whether or not you want to go broader and more strategic, and that's kind of where you're headed, or if you really want to go very, very deep into your technical practice. But
yeah, and I think training is definitely another aspect where you can help grow other people in the organization. That's a job unto itself. And I know you were a teacher, so you should know.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have a couple of minutes for the last question. So I would love everyone to say a couple of words. So how do you become actually an architect? So what is promotion, or how was that?
Yeah, I guess for me, I used to be a coder. So so I was working as a developer in a team. So I had a technical leader who was actually managing the team, but then I ended up taking on larger responsibilities, in the design. And then when the technical leader went on, actually moved on to another project, I was then promoted up to take over the technical leadership, technical team. And then things just grew from there. I then realized that actually I had a desire to actually move into architecture. So then, working with my company, they provided me with the career training, and I then started working as a junior architect, supporting a more senior architect to actually understand the whole thinking and the approach that an architect needs to go through. And then over time, the scope of my of what I was performing as an architect increased, such that then I ended up being the main architect on the project. And then things have just moved on from then. So then I went through leadership training to then take on roles where I'm actually leading architects. So it's a progression that you need to definitely look for opportunities, but also make sure, let the people around you and your company know that that's the direction that you actually want to go in, so that they can help support you.
Yeah, in my case, it was like an opportunity that came up at LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a really strong social tool for to build a career, and it's the way you can show what you have accomplished so far as well. So keep it updated. This is really important. There are a lot of recruiters taking a look at your profile. And regarding my career, I had really diverse experiences like development, infrastructure, leadership, sales. So it kinds of a natural way to get like a most generalistic position, like a solutions architect, looking for like all those the relationship that you need to build, the trust that you need to build with the customers, and also being a technical advisor and to help build like a reliable architecture. So I think it all depends. There are a lot of ways to become a software or a solutions architect. But it's important to do not rush things up, I think, because every opportunity you have, every role you take, every challenge you need to face, they are all preparing to the career you're really in. So this is, for me, really important to be grateful for all the opportunities on the way.
Sonya, Andrea, do you have like a couple of words and no more to add?
Yeah. I had the oddest journey, and I definitely participate in architecture discussions, but I wouldn't necessarily consider myself an architect. I've been more of a CEO of our organization that helps companies pay down technical debt and re-architect their systems. But the way that I came there was I have a background in marketing and sales, and I had a blog where I was describing all of these systems that I was creating to make things more efficient. And I was just like basically architecting things, but I didn't know that it was programming because I was using all these Boolean searches and stuff like that. But I actually had a friend of mine from high school, and at our high school reunion, he told me I was a programmer and didn't know it and wanted me to be the CEO of his company because he had a passion for legacy code. And so for me, it was just like stars aligning. I had never considered it, but it's been fantastic. And the link between communication and code is so critical. Like there's Conway's law, where the organizational communication architecture of your company is going to influence the architecture of your code. So if you have a command and control, organizational communication structure, it's very difficult to implement a microservices architecture. So knowing kind of the differences there, I've played a little bit more on the periphery, but more in making sure that operations supports the architectures that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I have a software engineering background. I'm a coder, so I think that evolution is fairly natural, but there's certain leaps in the career where I built up a system ground up. So I became a de facto architect of it. And then at some point, the company decided to re-platform broadly. And I looked and realized there's so much more around what I built that I should probably know about and know how things interplay. And I had an opportunity to do that during that project. And then it just kind of went on from there. I think one of the key points that I take away is, yes, having these broader opportunities, take them. Just because they sit outside of your primary expertise and they may look challenging, doesn't mean that you shouldn't try for them and take them and see where that takes you, next step in the ladder. And same with training. I noticed early on that people just take on trainings that are directly relevant to what they're doing now, as opposed to broadening out and saying, well, what could I do? Why don't I learn about something that isn't directly relevant and see how I can apply it later?
Okay, we have actually a lot of more questions, but unfortunately we don't have much more time to discuss them. So maybe if you have like time and wish, you can answer our guests directly in the chat. And I want to say like big thank you to each of you. So it was great experience moderating you. I hope it was pleasant for you as well. So thank you for being with us. And I wish you a great day then. And hopefully we'll see you on our other summits.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye. Okay, so firstly, I would like to remind you that all recordings of today's summit and of our previous summits you can find on our Geekle educational platform. And right now, I'm sending the link to the chat. And before we go to the break, I want to do like really important thing. So we mentioned all the time that we have this giveaway question for ticket, and now it's time to do like the first part of it. So for European time zone, so like here is our randomizer. So here all people that use this hashtag for this time. And now I'll set like randomize button, and first five people who are on the list, so you are the winners. So let's do this. So I'll now highlight people who are the winners of our giveaway. So you will be contacted with our team as soon as possible, or you can write us directly. I'll like share right now the email address, and yeah, so you can write our manager directly or just wait for a message for us. So I'll removing my screen, and before we go to the little break and have some rest before the next block, I would say really big thank you to each of you being with us today. We now saying bye-bye to people who are watching us in European time zone. So thank you for this day. I think tomorrow will be one more great day with top content from our top speakers. And now, so we will continue hearing topics you have already heard with our American people. So yeah, so let's have a little bit rest and see you in a couple of minutes. Yeah, see you. And one really important thing I forgot to mention is that people who are continuing watching us, so will continue on different YouTube links. So just right now I'm pasting this to our chat. So yeah, so let's see. We are switching to the new link on YouTube, so don't forget to do this and don't miss our next talks.